just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland, would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Our book today is The Women's Suffrage Movement, edited by Sally Roche Wagner. It is a collection of essays by a whole variety of people, from Gloria Steinem to onward. This is from the foreword. With the women's suffrage movement, Sally Roche Wagner has given us a unique gift: the real words and actions, writings and debates of white and black women who fought for over a century to gain an identity as free human beings and citizens. For most of those years, black women were legally owned as chattel, forced to work and to suffer the unique punishment of giving birth to children who were also enslaved. White women were not as restricted and endangered as African women or men, but as the daughters and wives of white men, they were also legal chattel with no right to leave their homes, disobey orders, profit from their own work, speak in public, have custody of their own children, own property without a guardian, or affect the patriarchal laws that governed their lives. Even many white men who fought against slavery supported the subordinate position of their wives and daughters. When Susan B. Anthony, an abolitionist and a suffragist, sheltered not only runaway slaves, but white wives escaping violent husbands, male abolitionist allies warned her that she was going too far. As Frederick Douglass, a freed slave abolitionist and suffragist himself, wrote in his autobiography, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy slavery and accepted their own subordinate position as natural." A century later, Gunnar Myrdal would explain in his landmark study of slavery that enslaved African women and men brought to these shores had been given the legal status of wives as the nearest and most natural analogy to the status of slaves. As he added, quote, "The parallel between women and Negroes is the deepest truth of American life, for together they form the unpaid or underpaid labor on which America runs," end quote. Wagner takes us into the rooms, writings, and discussions where white and black women and black men, all fighting for legal personhood and full citizenship, were both a miracle of shared purpose, despite all the lethal forces keeping them apart, and a tragedy of division that echoes in the need for intersectionality and inclusion in this day. Even the lynching of black men, crimes designed to maintain the racial order after the Civil War, was most often justified by proximity to white women, however imaginary or freely chosen. This tells us how dangerous and brave was the coalition for universal adult suffrage that you will read about here. It also reveals the betrayal when white men split the coalition apart by offering the vote to black men first, only to then limit their votes with poll taxes, impossible literacy tests, and violence. Yet despite this tragic division, and despite being labeled as varying degrees of non-human, this fractious rebellion and fragile coalition did eventually succeed in gaining citizenship for the majority of people in this country. Wagner brings us these imperfect and hopeful rebellions of the past as they happened, complete with divisions and debates, and a long organizational disagreement among suffragists about whether to seek the vote by federal amendment or state by state. She doesn't attempt to prove a thesis or to explain mistakes or to excuse destructive divisions. Other than the first and last chapters, each one with a very specific purpose, she doesn't insert herself at all. Instead, she allows us to witness the words and acts, dreams and disappointments, victories and defeats, visionary ideas and tactical errors of people fighting a battle that laid the basis for our continuing movement against hierarchies based on race and gender. It is this faithfulness to the past that allows us to learn lessons for changes in the present. In 30 years or so, this will no longer be a majority white country. It will better reflect the diversity that has always been its strength and its promise. Indeed, the first generation that is majority babies of color has already been born, and public opinion polls already show that the majority of Americans no longer support divisions by race or by gender. Yet there is also a lethal backlash from about a third of the country, including over half of white married women, among often those without a college education, who want to preserve their unearned place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's why these victories and defeats of the past become the best possible lessons and warnings for our present and future. By taking us into the rooms where history happened, Wagner allows us to see the parallels and differences, empathy and estrangements, connections and isolations that can hinder or help our goals now. Almost none of the people we will meet in these pages will live to celebrate the changes they are working for. This should tell us that social justice movements are not a temporary part of our lives. They are our lives. Most of the activists here were not sure that slavery would be abolished or that universal adult suffrage would ever succeed. This should give us humility about what we can predict and also arm us with faith and patience. Few guessed that the legal right to vote would come a half century later for white and black women than for black men, but would be mostly on paper. In the South, where most black Americans live, it would take another century plus an entire civil rights movement to overcome procedural and sometimes lethal barriers to voting. This should make us skeptical about changes that come from the top and that divide us more than empower us. And there are other lessons, and it continues, the women's suffrage movement.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. Sitting in for Tom. Honored to be here. And very appreciative of you being here. Whether you're listening in Poughkeepsie or at CPT Ain't Afraid of Me, or whether you're listening in Michigan or our friends in Seattle, happy birthday to Oregon. Happy Valentine's Day. A record number of people have been scammed on dating sites. Just saying, be careful out there. It's not always safe. Now, folks who have honored us with their presence on days when I have been here know that I like to talk about democracy as the first principle. To reframe the political debate as not merely right versus left, not even merely business versus labor, not even merely ownership versus working, or environment versus other stuff. But democracy versus opponents to democracy. People who are trying to erode the idea that we should decide together how things work. We have a guest. His name is David. He wrote a book, Alt America. He has made the case that in fact we have dug ourselves a really deep hole and that we need to dig ourselves out of it. He agrees, essentially, that we are facing forces that are opposed to democracy, and that is one of the things that has changed about the political debate. Joining us right now, David Nauert, thank you so much for being with us. Well, he's going to join us in a little bit. I point your attention to the Guardian article, entitled, in fact, We've Dug Ourselves a Really Deep Hole. The questions I want to ask him include, is it unfair to call it an assault on democracy? Is it unfair to say that, in fact, there is one element of the political debate, there is one movement that is in favor of democracy, another movement that is opposed to democracy, or is it just different views of what democracy means? I want to ask him about that. I want to connect him to, he might already be connected to Nancy MacLean, a book that I know is well thought of in these parts. And you can also call us. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. We're going to jump it off with a call because we've got one from Jesse. Jesse from Miami, Florida. How you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Honored to talk to you. Very heavy conversations all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I like to talk about money.
Yeah.
Because you talk about democracy, and we really got a problem with that, and we really got a problem with money. So my theory is that, for some reason, the gift of life and earth has been made, property, and nobody really have a choice in this deal that, made land, labor, ideas, personal property to people, and then we have to pay access to it. So that brings in the problem of money. Why do we need money? And, okay, I talked long enough. I want to be honored to hear your thoughts.
So, yeah, and the question that came through to me was sort of the role of money and do we need it? The way I would put it, is that a fair shortening or representation of your question, Jesse?
Yeah, because we really don't have no freedom of choice using money. It's just been
Understood.
So that's two questions in one. But yeah, basically, yeah.
I do think it's one of the fundamental questions facing us. We, and forgive me if I'm going to be a little, at best, elementary, at worst, pedantic. But it's really useful to have something to exchange so I don't have to carry around my bushel of oats to exchange it for a shirt. But in fact, that I can have something that's easier to put in my wallet or heck on my phone and purchase stuff. The question is, if and in the context where that method of transfer is mostly valued as a method of hoarding, it causes challenges. I use Bitcoin as an example. A bet that was made between a major Bitcoin investor and a tech journalist. And the tech journalist said, I don't think Bitcoin's going to be used a lot. And the Bitcoin investor saying, no, it's going to be used a lot. It's going to be way better. People are going to like having a method of exchange that is not as easy to track. They're going to like that that's easier to track its accuracy. All kinds of reasons that it's cheaper on transaction fees. All kinds of reasons people are going to use it. Well, it turns out that Bitcoin hype was big enough, that Bitcoin value was high enough that nobody wanted to trade. Nobody wanted to buy some oats or buy a shirt using Bitcoin. What they wanted to do was hold on to their Bitcoin, or maybe sell their Bitcoin so they could get cash and then use that cash, American dollars, to buy some oats or buy a t-shirt. Using it as hoarding, and that is just the most recent example. We see it all over the place and one of the reasons I talk about wealth disparities, not just income disparities, not just income inequality, is because the hoarding of the resource is often a bigger deal than the transaction of the resource. And so that's why I think that it's legitimate. Yesterday's big question was, should wealth inequality be on the front burner for the presidential campaigns? By the way, I'll say again, the call-in number is 202-808-9925. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in. We're taking Jesse's call. Dealing with a really fundamental question is, what is the role of currency in the modern world? Is it providing us freedom? Is it providing us the ability to do stuff? Or is it limiting our ability to do stuff and limiting freedom? We've now got David Nywood on the line, and we're going to take his call right now. David, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Tom. How are you?
You can call me Tom. I will take it as a compliment, but just so that I don't get arrested for fraud, my name is Jeff. I'm sitting in for Tom. All good. Thanks for being here. The way I introduced the conversation is we've been talking about democracy as a first principle, and and you have made the case in your book, very recently an article in interview in the Guardian, that there is in fact an assault on democracy. Let's start out by you making that case.
Well, I don't think it's very hard to make a case that the alt-right is fundamentally an attack on democracy, because it's really hostile to democracy in pretty much every shape, form, and fashion. It's about they want to replace democracy with authoritarian rule, and they see Donald Trump as their means to that method. And a lot of it is about displacing democracy, ending democratic rule.
But make that, David, if you would, spend a little time making that case, rather than just assuming it a priori or that we all kind of agree, oh yeah, the alt-right sucks and they want to get rid of democracy. What are the best examples to use to prove that, if people are around their own water cooler, their own sink, and wanting to make that case?
Sure. Well, for one thing, there is an overt hostility to the voting rights of Latinos and non-whites, which is a lot of why you hear the constant complaining, the agitation claiming that people are fraudulently voting. That's what the whole voter fraud accusations are about, is about claiming that non-whites are voting in larger numbers. And we actually see the anti-democratic impulse coming through as actual policy, actual Republican policy that comes out as vote suppression efforts in numerous states, including Georgia and North Carolina and Virginia. And these are places where we've actually seen vote suppression at work. And it's actually had a pretty profound effect on the national political scene, because I think that vote suppression had a key role in the 2016 election outcome.
So I want to stay in the role of devil's advocate, although it's fair to say the devil's doing fine. But what if I were to say, no, it's not that blank, the Republican Party, the right wing, the alt-right, the racist nationalists, it's not that they're against democracy. They're for a different kind of democracy that respects the firearm, that honors private property, that wants to protect the unborn child, that wants to give people a chance to get rich and have their money not taken, that respects the nuclear family, that respects that wants to protect against threats to American values, that thinks citizenship is important and it ought to mean something, and you have to do something to earn it and not just come across a border. Those things are essential elements of democracy rather than assaults on democracy. How would you respond?
Well, I don't think anybody who is involved in immigration questions the aspect of citizenship. What they do question is the attempt to actually deprive people who have become citizens of that citizenship, and people who are born citizens of their actual right to vote. So a lot of the black vote suppression, for instance, is actually directed at people who are not even immigrants at all, but are just black people. And but it's also, there are a lot of efforts a lot of attempts to deprive people of having their own voice in society, and this includes LGBT people, and it includes people of religious minorities. We've seen, for instance, a lot of people claiming that Muslims shouldn't even have the right to hold office, and that they shouldn't have the right to vote. We've seen people claiming, a lot. I mean, and this is all coming up out of the Republican Party, but it's also coming out of the alt-right, and it's really being driven in many regards by this agitation, the really loud agitation from the radical right.
And if I were to make the other case that, well, the alt-right, the racist nationalist fringe is just that. It's a fringe. It's not, it makes interesting copy. It's a fun way, a compelling way to criticize the current president, but we shouldn't overstate its influence in the American polity. What would be your response?
Well, it's true that we actually do have a lot of difficulty getting a handle on the numbers of people who are involved in the alt-right. I think our best sort of guesstimate is that we get from looking at internet traffic numbers, where participation levels are just extraordinarily high. Daily visitation rates in the hundreds of thousands, and that's very troubling. And then we see it also spreading into the streets. We saw it in Charlottesville, out here on the West Coast. We've seen it at these demonstrations in Portland and Seattle and Berkeley that I've been covering, and the folks like these street fighting gangs, like the Proud Boys, showing up and trying to create fights. But it's also important to understand that the influence that the radical right has goes well beyond its numbers. And one of the ways I like to try to explain that to people is when we talk about hate crime. When you look at hate crime participation, the perpetrators of hate crimes, the vast majority of them, are not actual members of hate groups. In fact, only about 8 to 10% of all hate crimes are actually caused by people, perpetrated by people who are members of hate groups. But well over 80% of all hate crimes sort of thing.
We're talking to David Nywert. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. Dave, we cut on you for a second, but continue to wrap up. Finish your answer.
But at any rate, so we see with hate crimes that even though very few of the people who actually commit them are actually members of hate groups, they're all picking up on the rhetoric and ideas of hate groups in committing these acts. And I think that's true very much of what we've been seeing in America. Think of all these videos that have been popping up of people who are yelling and saying foul things to minorities. And that's not just because everybody has a phone now that this is happening. In fact, in the first month after Donald Trump's election, we saw over 1,000 hate incidents, and which is just an extraordinary escalation. And I went through the data that the Southern Poverty Law Center collected on that, and nearly half of those incidents included people using either Trump's name or his rhetoric or something associated that makes it clear that they see themselves as acting on behalf of Trump.
And David, maybe you started to answer this question, but what's changed? If you're going to tell a lot of people in the country, including a lot of people of color in this country, that there are racists in the United States of America, that's not news. It can be upsetting. It can be something to fight against. But is it new? What's changed?
Well, what's changed is that it's happening on the internet, and they're recruiting. They're no longer recruiting older, middle-aged men who look backward to a halcyon golden era, as we saw with the militias in the 90s, and has been the case with most white nationalists and white supremacist groups throughout history. The alt-right is actually recruiting young white males, and they're doing so using the internet. And it's very sophisticated appeals. These are appeals that are geared towards young men. It's not backward looking at all. It's instead about building a new future for white men.
Yeah. So they have the new recruiting tools and now targets to have replacement smokers. What is what would you argue are the conditions under which that is that again made possible only because of new technology, or anything else that we should understand are the roots of the growth of the racist nationalists?
Well, there are a couple of things that are causing it. One is that some of it is actually the fact that it is taking place on the internet. The internet gives us the feel that makes us feel like we're interacting with other people. We're actually just interacting with bits on a screen. And so dehumanization becomes very, very simple on the internet. It's a very common thing. That's why we have so many misunderstandings on the internet. And because, you're not actually talking.
No, I get that. And I think, but what else? What else has helped fuel this?
Well, there's that, as some of it has to do with, obviously the conditions on the ground have changed a lot, that there is a great deal more immigration these days. Mm-hmm. And people are seeing changes in demographics. One of the changes that definitely we saw associated with people likely to vote for Trump was a lot of the reception to Trump was in places that were previously sort of mono-white areas, rural areas that were all white, suddenly had seen their demographics change dramatically because of the influx of Latino workers. And these were areas that it turned out were very likely to vote for Trump.
You say that there's been a deep hole that has been dug. You're quoted as saying, we've dug a deep hole. How do we dig ourselves out?
I think we need to understand that democracy is at risk, that it's not a joke. I mean, I really think Americans have kind of taken their democracy for granted in many regards over the past few years. And I think, it's time to wake up. So I think some of it just has to do with waking up and recognizing that, democracy is under attack, that there are elements that want to see it destroyed, that want to replace democracy with authoritarianism. And we're already seeing a rise in authoritarianism all around the world. You can go to the Philippines and Myanmar, you can look in Russia, you can look in Hungary and Turkey, and see that the tide of authoritarianism is rising everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be aware that democracies do die, and our democracy could die as well. I mean, we like to think that American democracy can never die, but I hate to tell people the truth is that it can.
We got about 30 seconds. Do you have a favorite reason why, or least favorite, most important reason why democracy is being taken more for granted? I have my own, but I'm interested in yours.
Well, I think, honestly, we have become very materialistic. And I honestly think that a revival of spiritual values and communitarianism is really needed. And I think actually that there is an appetite for it, particularly among young people. I'm really encouraged by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the people, the young people that I see surrounding her, and their idealism and their hope. And I think that's the future of America right there.
David Nowert, thank you so much for joining us. What do you want to plug? Anything that's going on people should know about as we go to break?
If you could plug my book, Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. I would appreciate it because...
Well plugged.
I think it's an important book. So.
David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back. Call us. Why do you think we've seen this assault on democracy?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
202-808-9925. Why do you think we've seen democracy being taken for granted and this assault on democracy?
Today we're reading from the brand new third edition, the 2018 edition of The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by me, the subtitle of Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late. This is from the chapter Climate Changes, which I did a huge update on over the last couple of years. Imagine you and your family had a time machine large enough to live in no matter what era you arrived in. Let's imagine that you dial your time machine back to 250 million years ago, when you step out onto a fern-covered field somewhere thousands of miles away from what is today Siberia. Unbeknownst to you, the lava flow has begun in the distance. As you're setting up your new home, you might notice a reddening of the sky at sunrise and sunset, but it wouldn't seem like anything dramatic was going on anywhere in the environment. Over the next few years and decades, you may notice that the weather is growing more intense, the seasonal extremes more noticeable. Still, you'd have no way of knowing that the planet was moving toward a point that would lead to the death of almost everything. Over the years, as you become an old man or woman, your children might notice that the larger plants, what today would be our trees, seem to be dying faster than normal from what appears to be some sort of blight or fungus. It's as if the plant's immune systems have been compromised. Long after you're dead, your grandchildren might begin to notice that the rains are not coming the way they used to, and when they do, the storms are wildly more ferocious. The results are either floods or droughts. Insects and small animal populations are less evident. The air is becoming corrosive. It's getting harder to breathe. The sunrises and sunsets are becoming more spectacular with radiant colors of light cast across the sky. By the time your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are born, the lava flows may be settling down, but the tipping point has been passed. Although it was a slow process, it was an inexorable one. The world, over thousands of years, has warmed to the degree where all of the abundant life your descendants could see around themselves was doomed. The lava flow in Siberia, by throwing into the atmosphere a variety of greenhouse gases, had been steadily pushing up the temperature of the Earth. While many of these gases were themselves toxic, it would be their combined greenhouse effects, along with those of the multiplying carbon dioxide levels, that would take down the planet. But you would only know that in retrospect, when pretty much everything was dead. Fast forward to today. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in the atmosphere trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000 years of human history. We're on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a much different place from the one currently cradling us, or even the one in which modern humans evolved. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, agricultural collapse, they're all taking place now. One recent July afternoon, we had an electrical storm here in central Vermont that was so severe it took out 2 of my computers and blew circuit breakers throughout the house. Our home wasn't unique. Many families lost most or all of their electrical appliances. Larry, a fellow we'd hired to do some repair work on our half-mile long driveway, stood atop a hill with me a week after the storm and told me how his wife had been thrown across the room from an electrical shock she received touching their screen door during the storm. It's not normal weather here, he said. It used to be the Vermont weather was famous for always changing, always unpredictable, but the last few years have been like nothing before. A lot of people agree with Larry. Extreme weather events like the 14-year drought that savaged Australia starting in 1995 and the freezing destruction of Superstorm Sandy are on the rise. Between 2011 and 2013, the U.S. suffered 32 extreme weather events, each wreaking at least $1 billion in damage. 2012, the year of Superstorm Sandy, was the second costliest year on record, with $110 billion in damages. During the 2017 hurricane season, Hurricane Harvey appeared and quickly developed into a 1,000-year event, dumping 20 inches of rain over nearly 29,000 square miles surrounding the Houston metropolitan area, flooding an area the size of New Jersey. Rebuilding from Hurricane Harvey alone could cost up to $180 billion in damages, making it the costliest storm in U.S. history. But how long until the next superstorm? The year 2016 set new records as the hottest year in recorded history, with average global temperatures of 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Along with the heat waves, flooding and drought accompanying this temperature increase are melting polar ice caps and in turn rising sea levels. The planet's sea level has risen an average of 8 inches since 1880, with dramatic gains in the last half of the 20th century. In the 50 years since 1963, the ocean rose 2.5 inches in Los Angeles, 6 inches in Boston, and 12.5 inches in Galveston, Texas. The polar ice caps are in an unprecedented state of decline, with sea ice in Antarctica and the Arctic measuring at 1.48 million square miles less than the average 1981 through 2010 average. At the end of 2016, the Arctic saw temperatures 36 degrees Fahrenheit above average. When the mathematics and physics become as compelling as they are now, big business gets alarmed. In November of 2012, the international accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers issued a rather dire warning for the future of business on the planet. After all, if the human race has been reduced to living in caves or is extinct, nobody's going to buy or sell anything. In a news release sent out internationally entitled "Business as Usual is Not an Option," as current rates of emission reduction point to 2 degrees of warming, Jonathan Grant, Director of Sustainability and Climate Change, said this: "The new reality is a much more challenging future in terms of planning, financing, and predictability. Even doubling our current annual rates of decarbonization globally every year to 2050 would still lead to 6 degrees Celsius, making governments' ambitions to limit warming to 2 degrees appear highly unrealistic." The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for being with us. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. How'd we get into this mess? If we agree, if journalists like David and I would agree that there is a deep and broad assault on democracy, how come? Always there? Just a little more obvious now? Maybe it's just overstated. If it's not overstated, what's undergirding it? What's caused it? What are we going to do about it? The call-in number is 202-808-9925. We'll also be talking in the third hour. It is a one-year anniversary today, the one-year anniversary today of the Parkland murders. I did not say shooting, I said murders. In the second hour, we'll be talking about the Green New Deal. Another thing, I'm going to be on tomorrow also, and if anybody who's listening has a cool thing, yesterday we heard from the mutualists, they called themselves, in Madison, Wisconsin, about cool stuff they are doing to try to rethink some of their economic transactions and community interactions in Madison. Would welcome people's calls about cool stuff happening around town, cool stuff happening around your state, cool stuff happening around the country. Where are there, in fact, ripples of hope that can be used as model policy happening in the nonprofit sector, in the co-op sector, in the policy sector? Would love people to share those as well. We've got on the line right now Victoria from KPFK, Upland, California. Hello, Victoria.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I'll be short, and I just wanted to give you my thoughts about why we're in this hole. And I honestly do believe, if you just stay with me for a minute or a minute and a half, I believe it's because industry and media have done such a great job in promoting individualism and consumerism, and no one's really promoting the common goods of the people for the people. And so we all, who's been affected up until now has been the usually suppressed minority groups. And when they were voicing their grievances, we were also happy to kind of look away when they were being suppressed by police brutality or other forces of our government, because it didn't affect us. But now that the socioeconomic standards of the white males have changed and they've kind of joined the ranks of the normally suppressed people, we didn't even realize we were losing our democratic rights because at the time we didn't need to voice our opinions or voice our grievances. It wasn't affecting us. Now that it is affecting the white man, and they're finding out that, wait a minute, I'm not allowed to speak up, and because I'm going to be, for some reason, suppressed by my local authorities. Now, hence, we have these fringe groups, and I think it's a problem that we have fringe groups, not because we have them, we've always had them, but because now they've kind of captured the American political system, because the fringe groups have become more sophisticated, where they've changed their beer bellies and undershirts for suits and ties. They've discovered the value of education, and they've kind of infiltrated all kinds of branches of the government and other society, pillars of society. Our law firms are filled with them. Our police stations are filled with them. And honestly, it's only happening because we just, for some reason, as white society, can't fathom the fact that the system is broken. And so instead of looking and seeing what's wrong with the system and the condition we're in, we're kind of scapegoating minorities, blacks, Mexicans, Asians, I don't know, whatever, LGBT community. It's because it's so much easier to wrap your head around the other for the condition you're in rather than the actual system that's created the condition, because that system has worked for mostly the white male for so long. It's just a hard pill to swallow.
And Victoria, if you were, and maybe this puts you on the spot too much, but if you were going to do something about it, what would be your favorite thing? And maybe, vote or what, but you go ahead.
Well, I honestly think we need to, first of all, take money out of politics and make it a playing field for everyone. And I honestly think since the airwaves belong to the people, they're supposed to belong to the people. I honestly believe every station on the television, every station on the radio must, without any choice, give public radio and hours. I mean, they need to give 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever hours we decide as a collective of people to broadcast people's voices. And so we can all go back to promoting our common needs, common goods. We kind of need to wrap our needs around, because we all kind of have the same needs, but nobody knows it. We all feel alone because, if you're Black, you think your needs are very different than if you're American Indian. But once we start talking to one another and realizing we all have the basic needs as human beings, whether you're American or not, whether you're an immigrant or not, we kind of will, I think, start sowing the bonds of humanity. And we just need to come back to really just community self-serving. But we don't have the space to do it. You can't even go to a city hall and ask for space because it's $400 an hour. I mean, even though we own on paper our common goods, we're supposed to own the airwaves. We have I think KPFK is one of the only. I'm in Los Angeles, one of the only public radio stations that I can call and talk to and voice my opinion and hear other people do the same. NPR doesn't do it. It's supposed to be, public broadcasting. We just don't have the airwaves, and they're supposed to be ours. I mean, why are we?
It's why we do this, Victoria. And thank you so much for calling in, and heard you say that heard you say a bunch of stuff in there, including that there's been a lot of focus, a lot of glorification of individualism, less glorification, less discussion, less highlighting of how we're stronger together than we are apart. And also the transformation where you said sort of the beer belly white man is now, there are many more of them in a similar economic circumstance to people of color, and we haven't yet come to grips with, or some people haven't yet come to grips with, what all that's going to mean culturally. And you also want to focus on the system. There was else in there as well. Want to get to Rob listening on TuneIn. Rob from Mesa, go ahead.
Yes. Hey, I've got just a little bit of a disagreement with you said, is there a disparity between wealth and income? Yeah. And I'd like to expand that to say, no, there's a disparity between tax and fines and income. Okay. And the reason why I say that is because, I look at it this way. All income is income. So why don't we, tax it all the same? Why is a business different than a dividend, different than a whatever? It should be all taxed the same. And the other thing is about the disparity. I'm going to point this out. Trump, who made bad decisions, lost billions of dollars, he gets to write that billions of dollars off against all his future income for decades. So his kids probably won't even have to pay taxes on any of the business adventures because of the tax loophole that allows him to write off his loss. Now, opposed to like in 2008, if you bought a house, 5-10 years before the crash, you paid into your house tens of thousands of dollars. Now, the people who created that, fiasco on the market dip, the banks get the house back. You don't get to write off that $20,000 you put into that house against your future income. So there's a disparity right there. Now, when I talk about fines, it's real easy. When you get a speeding ticket, that's the most regressive ticket there is.
Yeah, $80 or $250 for everybody, no matter how much that impacts you. I get that, but here's my minor quibble, and that is that even if there was equalization, by equalization I don't mean regressivization, right? Even if we address taxes and fines, so that different transfers, so the transfer of real estate or the transfer of hedge fund profits were taxed at a similar rate, or heck, the transfer of inheritance was taxed at a similar rate. One could make an argument those things could be taxed at higher rates, but let's say let's tax at least a similar rate as regular income. That would address what you're talking about, and also fines if tolls over bridges were done based on ability to pay and not just $3 for everybody. That would do something. Or if the traffic fines were based on ability to pay, not only flat for everybody, done in regressive nature, that would address that issue. It still wouldn't do everything about ownership. That if we fine at sin, and if we tax at transfer, if you benevolently or neutrally hold property and just let it appreciate and do not transfer, then there's not opportunity either to fine or tax. And I'm not saying that the most important thing is to fine or tax, but if we're concerned about equality, merely taxing or fining, I think, is not the only things we should be thinking about. We also have to think about systems of ownership. Systems of ownership by community, systems of ownership of across generations, and how we want to think about that in your fourth generation. But on the chance you wanted to finish your thought, Rob, go ahead if you want to either push back on me or finish up.
Well, just the last thing on the inheritance tax. The people who don't understand, they say, well, they already taxed on that. Why give it? Why tax it again? And all I have to say to that is, like, if someone came up to you that you didn't know and gave you a corporation, you would pay taxes on that as a gift. So it's the same thing for inheritance. So for those who say, it's double taxation, it's not, because those kids did not earn that. They were just born into it, so it doesn't count the same.
You may have triggered my rant on the inheritance tax, which I will give after the break. But Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to go to break in just a second. Here are a few reasons that I want to tease about why I think we have seen a rise. And yes, it relates to wealth inequality. That'd be one of them. I think that Victoria made a really important point that some of this is about racial dynamics and racist dynamics in itself, and how that, and as our country diversifies, how do we come to grips with that? And a system that seemed to benefit a greater number, now benefiting fewer, that's also a big part of it. I think Victoria also made the point of the rise of a particular kind of media. I also want to cue what the aging and death of World War II veterans has to do with it. I want to cue up what the erosion of norms in general has to do with it. And maybe I'll give my rant on the estate tax. We're going to be right back. You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Thanks for being with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back here on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Thanks for being with us. The call-in number 202-808-9925. Jamie, you're on Free Speech TV, Round Rock, Texas.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Just a quick slogan that is kind of helping me think about my participation. We've all heard freedom is not free. It occurred to me to add democracy is not a free ride.
Thank you for the slogan, Jamie. What's your favorite way to use the slogan or favorite context? In speeches, on banners? How do you want us to throw around the slogan?
Well, I'm talking to people right now. I work with the public, and I'm talking to my family and friends, just trying to be communicative and involved, because I'm 64 years old, and I grew up thinking that America was a democracy, done deal. So I've had a rude awakening, really, realizing that it's not a done deal, that democracy is alive, it can be in flux at any given time, and it is definitely under serious attack. So we have work to do.
Yeah. And I appreciate... Go ahead, finish your thought.
Go ahead. Well, that particular terminology just kind of helps me pull myself into reality and go, I got to do my part.
Democracy is not a free ride, thank you. And as Tom might say, as Governor Bob Roberts might say, democracy is not a spectator sport. And as Tom might say, tag, you're it. Tom from River Falls, Wisconsin, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Jefferson. Yeah, I think where this confusion comes from is the word freedom kind of goes off on your last caller. The cons they believe freedom comes from capitalism, and liberals believe freedom comes from democracy. And this is a deliberate strategy from Fox Noise and Frank Luntz, they're the linguists, to always connect the word freedom with markets, free markets, capitalism. And it even goes back to Milton Friedman on his book, Capitalism and Freedom. And in fact, I saw this guy from AEI on Lou Dobbs a few years ago, and he says to Lou, China has more freedom than France. And that even blew Lou Dobbs away. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, their markets are freer. And you got socialist France with their, all these regulations. And I thought that dawned on me, man, these guys, they think freedom comes, that France with its democracy is less free than China, which is an authoritarian state.
I think it's one of the most important points, Tom. I think it's one of the most important points that the too successful, I'm not going to call it fully successful because there are at least people like you who recognize, but the too successful twist of words to call unfettered application of economic power Okay, it is power. It's not freedom. If I have, if somebody owns all the land, that does not increase my ability, my freedom to be able to walk upon it or do stuff on it. In fact, it infringes, it impinges, it limits my freedom to walk upon that land. It is not the application of freedom, it is the application of power. An unfettered application of ownership power, defining that as freedom, is one of the most important elements of the big lie in the 20th century. And thank you so much for your call. That music means I got the last word, unless you want to say goodbye. All right, Tom. You don't get to say goodbye. But we appreciate you, and we're going to be right back. 202-808-9925. The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. You're you. Why are we taking democracy for granted? Darren's calling in from YouTube. I'm not sure where YouTube is.
Hello?
Hello, Darren. You're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is the headquarters of YouTube,
Yep, I'm in Baton Rouge, and I wanted to talk about democracy and why it's being taken for granted.
Yeah.
And I believe it's like death by 1,000 needle pricks. You know, any one policy...
Do you want to name each of these needle pricks?
Voter ID, you know, on the face of it, hey, that's reasonable. Have an ID. You know, the polling place has been moved. You know, they claim for budget reasons or something. And any of these these little things are easy to overlook. But in aggregate, you bleed out. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that we're kind of caught in a catch-22, and that, you know, we say the voting system is rigged, but if you want to change it, you got to vote. And it's like, how do we use a corrupt system to fix itself? You know, it's kind of a really hard riddle.
So I heard you say two things. One is that it's taken for granted because some of the assaults on democracy are not so obvious. They are little needle pricks. And the other but again, at root, is it just that's forces that have always been there, or any other reason why people aren't paying as much attention or don't care about it as much? Or maybe they do.
It's multifaceted. Back in the days of polling taxes and racist polling tests, racism was mixed in, and that was a lot of reason why people didn't care. And there's also people who don't believe in the system wholesale. And so, they say, well, the whole system's corrupt. So, of course, from top to bottom. So I don't believe in any of it.
So, Darren, how do you deal with that? You're willing, and one of the reasons I love being able to do this is I recognize you're a real person and not a bot because I can hear your voice. Like Victoria was saying, there need to be forums. We hear real voices. What David Nywert was saying, where it's not just bits and bytes, but real human beings. But what keeps you going? Because, it can feel like a pretty weak balm to say, the system is corrupt, go and get in that line to vote. What keeps you going? Did I lose you? Oh, I lost you. Oh, well. What keeps you going? I'm still curious, but also we're talking about what is undergirding taking democracy for granted. We've got Raul on. Raul, do you pronounce Raul? That's, by the way, my dad's given name in El Paso, Texas.
That's where I'm calling from. Thank you for your program.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of things to talk about, but to be a little bit more direct, El Paso had 200,000 people vote in the midterm, non-presidential, thanks to Beto O'Rourke. And 2014, non-presidential, normally you're going to get 35,000 people. There's still 250,000 people registered that didn't vote.
Yeah.
So the work continues. One of the things that we're looking at doing, a veterans group, is if you remember the movie Three Billboards, buy billboards. And when I'm always talking about what's going on today, and it's really a very exciting time, although a dangerous time. But people start telling me this and that about refugees that shouldn't come here, blah, blah, Trump is good, blah, blah. I say, you know what? I'm not going to argue with you. Watch Free Speech TV for 6 months. and then we'll get back together and we'll discuss. And what we're looking to do is buy billboards, rent them, and advertise Free Speech TV, because one of the problems here is that people don't have good information.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good people on the wrong side.
Yeah.
And the reason they're on the wrong side is because maybe they watch Fox News, and maybe they think, okay, well, you know, if you are a national cable company, you're obligated to tell the truth. Well, that's totally wrong.
Yeah,
we have a lot of power, and there's a lot of people power.
Yeah, and it's related to what Victoria was saying, one of our previous callers, when talking about the airwaves, and related to what our immediately previous caller was saying, well, is voting enough? And I would say voting is necessary, but it sure as heck isn't enough. And engaging in one's local community, yes, trying to help spread the word for media outlets that you think are pro-democracy, that are pro-community, that are pro-social, that are pro-human. I was thinking about water. I've been thinking a lot about water, and not just because of the phone, meeting I just had. A friend of mine from law school is on the board of trustees, and Harvard University just invested a bunch of dough in buying wineries, with water rights, because they know if they can get some business on top of water rights that'll pay the carrying costs, property tax, etc., of that land. Eventually those water rights are going to be worth a whole lot. I've been thinking a lot about water, but I've also been thinking about water when I go to the places where I probably shouldn't go, fast food restaurants. And if you notice, if you go to that little place where you get the self-serve drinks, they're all like nice colors, fancy logos, Madison Avenue design, whatever the heck, Dr. Pepper. And then there's the water one, and it's just white with sans serif font. It is not well marketed. By the way, all the other ones need the water to have the Dr. Pepper. But the water one is not well marketed. Part of the challenge is, and I started then paying attention as I tried to get a handle on my own health, trying to attack my own chubs, I realized that if I went to the movies, everything there I could buy, all this stuff, and I liked eating a lot of that stuff, it's all basically poison. It's all the only thing that there were. Like if I'm trying to cut out carbs, for instance, I'm trying to not eat a whole bunch of sugar and simple carbohydrates. If I go to the movies or if I go to the corner plaid pantry, nearly every single thing I can buy is the thing I'm not supposed to eat. And at the movies, every single thing. The only thing I could have was like, I don't know, if you're not a vegan or vegetarian, I could have a hot dog with no bun. I could have mustard with nothing else. The stuff that is marketed is not the stuff that's good for you. And I know my parents used to tell me that, and I thought they were just crunchy friends of hippies. They were the hippies themselves, right? My dearly departed stepmother was, Woodstock attendee. She came by it honestly. But so much of the stuff that is getting marketed because it's not the good stuff, because you got to solve the problem of people not otherwise getting it. We've got to figure out how to market the good stuff. And the good stuff includes what our friend Raul was just talking about. How do we get better media? And that's why we appreciate you so much. That's why I thank you for letting me be here. 202-808-9925. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. From
Our book today is From Slave Ship to Supermax, Mass Incarceration, Prisoner Abuse, and the New Neo-Slave Model by Patrick Elliott Alexander. This is Chapter 1. Talking in George Jackson's Shadow is the title, If Beale Street Could Talk. Prison preoccupied the literary imagination of James Baldwin. Yet his biographer David Leeming is one of the few to notice that prisons and prisoners were a significant part of Baldwin's own personal experience. Even the most cursory glance at Baldwin's published works and interviews bear out Leeming's important observation. In his essay Equal in Paris, 1955, Baldwin reveals that during his time in France, he was, quote, arrested as a receiver of stolen goods and spent 8 days in prison. While confined, Baldwin witnessed with great shock another incarcerated man's bleeding and wounding go unattended intentionally by prison staff. In his longer essay, No Name on the Street, 1972, Baldwin reflects on frequent prison visits that he made to his friend Tony Maynard, a black man who suffered violent treatment from guards after he was falsely accused with the murder of a white U.S. Marine. Baldwin's advocacy for black political prisoners in particular deeply informed his writings and public addresses throughout the 1970s and included actions such as aiding in the release of imprisoned Black Panther Party co-founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. In 1970, Baldwin was so outraged by the appearance of Angela Davis, the black revolutionary and advocate for political prisoners in handcuffs and mock mugshot posture on the cover of Newsweek magazine, that he published an open letter to the New York Review of Books in which he deemed her jailing a continuation of slavery and a foreshadowing of a radicalized epidemic of mass incarceration at one and at the same time. Quote, only a handful of the millions of people in this vast place are unaware that the fate intended for you, Sister Angela, and for the numberless prisoners in our concentration camps, for that is what they are, is a fate which is about to engulf them too, end quote. When Baldwin spoke out about racism in the criminal justice system in the Dick Cavett Show in 1973, he won widespread admiration among imprisoned black communities, receiving, quote, so many letters from them that he determined to arrange a Christmas version of his musical drama, The Hallelujah Chorus, that would tour American prisons. Finally, in 1982, Baldwin published a letter in which he insisted that artists and prisoners have more in common with one another than have servants of the state. Baldwin was a stranger neither to witnessing nor to writing about prisons and prisoner abuse. Yet Baldwin's oeuvre had not been examined extensively in the context of his engagements with the literature and life experiences of imprisoned men and women. This chapter focuses on Baldwin's understanding of prisoner abuse and police intimidation as interrelated, radicalized social control functions of the contemporary U.S. carceral state, and pays careful attention to how his historicizing of radicalized state violence in fiction is shaped by his admiring engagement with the writings of imprisoned intellectuals. Baldwin, I contend, alludes to the human chattel conditioning, disciplinary violence, and economic exploitation that typified the institution of slavery in his Black Liberation Movement era short stories and novels to situate his black working class characters' subjection to racial profiling, police brutality, wrongful incarceration, indefinite solitary confinement, prisoner abuse, and premature death in racialized historical context. Focusing mostly on Baldwin's novel If Beale Street Could Talk, 1974, this chapter explores how Baldwin, inspired by the narrative techniques of the imprisoned intellectual George Jackson, links a repressive logic of racial terror from the era of antebellum slavery with the state's practice of white supremacist social control into the contemporary criminal justice system. I argue that by incorporating Baldwin's conception of neo-slavery into the elusive framework for Beale Street, Baldwin elucidates the predictability, rather than the aberrant nature, of black men's hypercriminalization, incarceration, and brutalization by the state. Beale Street thus exemplifies well what I theorized in the introduction as a neo-abolitionist novel. With this work, Baldwin becomes the first canonical African-American writer to construct a conceptual model of the prison-industrial complex in fiction that privileges the narrative viewpoint of its captives while also making apparent slavery's vestiges in the contemporary U.S. criminal justice system. My point of departure for this chapter is Baldwin's career-length consideration of racial terror as a state-sanctioned social control function of both pre- and post-slavery American life, and the relationship of this instrumentalist terror to blacks' recurring encounters with state violence in the late 20th and 21st centuries. This contextualization establishes a broader framework within which my reading of criminalization and punishment in Beale Street might be understood. Baldwin's witnessing of the physical, psychological, and spiritual harm that the criminalized black body endures at the hands of the state shows up prominently in his nonfiction works as well. In his book-length essay, No Name in the Street, for instance, Baldwin's assessment of wounds that prison guards inflict on his former driver and bodyguard, Tony Maynard, a wrongfully incarcerated black man, is characteristically disturbing and damning. The book, From Slave Ship to Supermax. One of the really great ways that you can support our program, specifically just the Thom Hartmann program here, and all the work that we're doing, is by going to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, all run together, and signing up. You know, become a supporter of our program. And we have special content that's only available to our Patreon supporters, including a rant that we just put up about this amazing thing that I just learned. I learned this from Professor Barack Orbach of the University of Arizona Medical School, or Law School, that Robert Bork's bizarre idea that it doesn't matter how big companies get, it doesn't matter how destructive they are of competition, it doesn't matter how they wipe out local communities, all that matters is that consumers have low prices, led to directly the Walmartization of America. It was adopted by the Supreme Court in '77, by Reagan in '82, and it's still the law. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. So what the heck are we going to do? What are going to be the key priorities in the coming presidential election, in coming local initiatives, if we're going to get around and galvanize around a handful of, and why a handful? Well, because we can remember a handful. We need to do more than a handful of things, but we could really galvanize around a handful of things. And if one of those parts of the handful of stuff we were going to galvanize around was a strategic initiative that we might call a Green New Deal to address simultaneously, at least in some measures, the threat to the climate and climate catastrophe, and the challenge of wealth inequality, particularly along racial and also generational lines, as well as figuring out the kind of economic prosperity that doesn't bankrupt us environmentally or morally over time. What ought that look like? On the air now, we have someone, and already there's been a couple of challenging comments offered online. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter. You can get Thom Hartmann at Twitter. I'm Jefferson D. Smith. Welcome your questions. My email address is jeffersonsmith@gmail.com. Welcome your thoughts and questions. On the air right now, we have economics professor and author Noah Smith. No relation. Noah, thanks for joining us. You there, Noah? Where'd Noah go?
In the day.
Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thank you.
I read a few things you've written. One was you whacking the, for want of a better phrase, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Green New Deal plan. Another was you proposing your own ideas of what you thought maybe is, I don't know if you use the word more affordable or sensible or what adjective you use, but stuff that you would support. And I sort of wanted to break this conversation down in three parts. One, what's the stuff about the Green New Deal that you hate? What's the stuff you like? And what's your own stuff? And I figure we can start wherever you want. You want to start with stuff you hate, stuff you like, or your own stuff?
Well, let's start with stuff I hate.
Go there.
All right. So the Green New Deal's biggest problem is, well, it has two big problems. First problem is that it doesn't have any taxes. And if you looked at this FAQ they posted online and then yanked and then claimed wasn't real and then later sort of admitted was real after all, they said that basically they're going to pay for the whole thing with massive deficits. And you say, oh, well, Trump pays for tax cuts with deficits, and we have deficits all the time. But if you look at the scale of these deficits, it's about 35 times the size of what the Trump tax cuts gave us. So it's quite a lot, and that's a minimum estimate. That's my minimum estimate. It could be more than 35 times.
All right, so
That's
go
a
ahead.
lot
Keep
of
going.
debt, and you got to worry that isn't going to wreck our economy. At the same time, it has like a lot of permanent new entitlements, like a good job guaranteed for everyone by the federal government forever. Is probably not a good idea. Universal basic income, economic security for those quote unquote unwilling to work, probably not. A guarantee of affordable housing for all. I mean, that sounds good, but how are you going to do that? So there's a number of things in here that could easily break the bank, paid for by deficits, and it's just sort of a scary thing. The second thing I hate, and I'm just dissatisfied with. Let's not say.
No, I like. I think hate's funnier. Keep going.
All right. Second thing I hate is that the plan overwhelmingly concentrates on reducing United States carbon emissions, whereas we're only 1/7 of global carbon emissions. We're only 14%, and that number is shrinking every year while everyone else's emissions are going up. And so, basically, reducing our own emissions in this hope that like other countries will take our good moral example and that will save the world is, that's a big stretch. So I'd like to focus on things that will actually help the rest of the world decarbonize, because that's where most of the emissions are actually coming from.
All right. I'll respond quickly to two of them, then I want to go to the stuff that you like. On the showing all the stuff that, and I heard basically two critiques on the context or the elements of the plan, at least. One was, well, it doesn't say it's how to pay for it, and it'll be really, really expensive. On the not showing the cost, I mean, I don't know, thinking from a marketer's perspective, when you go to the BMW dealership, the BMW ad doesn't start out with the cost of the BMW. It starts out with the value. It starts out with what's needed. It starts aspirational, and then it gets to cost. Your concern is what? That people get excited about it and then get disillusioned when they realize that it can't get passed. What do you see as the harm of saying, hey, no, we need to think at a scale that's as big as the problem, even though we don't right now have the revenue that is identified or earmarked to address the problem at the scale that's as big as the problem. Why is that a bad thing?
So, I mean, the bad thing is if we actually do it. I mean, I have trouble thinking this 12-dimensional chess of complicated, like political move and counter move and shifting the Overton window and all that stuff people talk about. I think what would be good if we actually did it, and if we did that Green New Deal tomorrow, if we did all those things tomorrow, which I'm sure its proponents would like, it would pose big, I'm not saying it would wreck our economy, but it would have a risk of wrecking our economy, pose big risks, and while not doing a hell of a lot to combat actual climate change. And so that's sort of the worst of both worlds right there.
All right.
I'll see the reason for that.
And then my other is, well, I can understand why somebody who's trying to lobby essentially put out that at that timing. I mean, if I'm thinking as their strategist, what I'm thinking is you put that out to help frame the debate in the coming presidential election. And they want, hey, go big and make sure you focus on things you can do as president. And it's also interesting to me, though, if you want to do things you can do, what are things you can do globally if you're, say, a member of Congress?
I think globally, if you're a member of Congress, I mean, ultimately the policies that we do have to affect the calculus for all these other countries where the majority of emissions are actually being produced and all the emissions increase is happening. We have to affect their incentives. We can't just yell at them, hey, get rid of your carbon even though you're still poor. We've got to create and give them the technologies that allow them to decarbonize their own economies and get rich without while still getting rich, while not wrecking their
we're using a lot more carbon than any of those countries with less technology, and we were the ones holding up the Paris Climate Accords, not like Namibia.
Well, first of all, both those things are in large part wrong, because number one, we produce more per capita, but little countries like Qatar produce like a lot more per capita than us. The point is, per capita isn't what kills the climate. Total carbon emissions are what kills the climate, and that's why this is a much thornier problem than just saying, okay, let's find the people who are producing more than their fair share and have them cut back. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut the mustard. It's not going to get the job done. We've got to actually reduce total carbon emissions, and that's a much harder problem because you have all these poor countries that produce the bulk, like 6/7 and rising of actual total carbon emissions. We've got to, figure out a way. We've got to help these guys decarbonize their economies while also getting rich. Otherwise, they won't do it because India refuses to stay poor, and stuff like that. And second, about the Paris Climate Accord,
India is a big deal. India and China are a big deal. But India and China are a big deal. Yeah. But I think that I think we should not understate the importance of the American leadership role and our failure to lead on this. I mean, to say, hey, we should do way more stuff in this country is not. Too often, I think the response of no, we should do things in other countries is a cop out of what we should be doing here.
Well, you're right. That a lot of people use this as a cop out. It's frustrating because a lot of the people who want to do nothing about climate change use this as an excuse to do nothing. I want to use it as an excuse to do more instead of less.
So let's talk about that more. Let's talk about the things where you think could be the highest leverage stuff that could inform, again, the presidential debate early on, which could help frame what's happening. Because I also, and one minor quibble I would have with your piece is I don't think of a Green New Deal as something that should just be done by the federal government, right? I think that we should set an aspiration and then figure out what we can do locally. Can you stick around? You can stick around for a minute to continue the conversation?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we'll be right back. We got Noah Smith. I'm Jefferson Smith. To my knowledge, we're not related. But we're getting along fine, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We'll be right back.
Cousin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Well, I'm with Noah Smith on Free Speech TV. I'm Jefferson Smith on the Thom Hartmann Program. Noah, we were just getting to what are some of the stuff that you like? What are the elements of the Green New Deal that you think should be highlighted?
Well, so the most important thing is this transition to zero carbon energy and building of green infrastructure, especially a new smart grid. That is going to be stuff that not only reduces our own carbon emissions a lot and fast, it's going to serve as a great example to other countries because it'll show them, look, you too can do this smart grid. You too can get off carbon-based electricity really fast. And so I think that's my absolute favorite part. We absolutely need to do that. And the green jobs that provides, I don't want to do this permanent job guarantee, thing that they do, but then I do want to.
And how come? How come you don't like how come you don't like the job guarantee? Because you think it's expensive and you don't want to get the money. You want to do what is necessary to get the money for, or you just think some people don't want to work? Why do you like a jobs guarantee?
Well, the jobs guarantee basically, first of all, it's going to outlast the sort of green infrastructure thing. So we're going to be left. We'll be like, okay, well that's done. What are we going to guarantee people jobs doing now? And so I think it's going to, turn into sort of make work kind of stuff. And if we pay the job guarantee jobs really well, it'll even pull people out of productive private sector work into stuff that we just sort of like make up and have people do. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be a good thing. It's going to lead to, resentment because people will say, oh, you're just doing make work and stuff like that. It'll also be extremely expensive. And, maybe it's the kind of thing that would come in handy in like a big depression or recession like the one we just had, putting people to work. But in normal times, it's, it could just pull people out of better jobs and, more productive jobs. While costing the government a lot of money, and it's this permanent new entitlement, this permanent massive new expansion. No other country has ever really done a job guarantee. Mm-hmm. We've had countries try to directly provide government jobs, and unless you're in the middle of a deep depression, that doesn't really tend to work very well. The results are not particularly impressive unless you're in the middle of a depression, like when we had the New Deal and Roosevelt put a bunch of unemployed people to work.
So some of the parts you like the infrastructure stuff, doing a smart grid.
I love it.
You also talked about technology. Technology means what? Incentive subsidies to private business. It means funding ARPA, to the level of the National Institute of Health. What's the, say more about how you would fuel technology.
Right. Well, so there's basically two things. There's two kinds of technology. There's technology that we don't know yet, and there's technology that we do know that we need to make cheaper. The stuff that we don't know yet, we need to where we basically need to develop like new ideas, like new inventions. That we have to do through ARPA. That's our energy research agency, and its budget is only now $300 million. The National Institutes of Health budget is $30 billion, 100 times more. So we need to 100x the ARPA budget. As for the stuff we already have, like solar power and batteries, we just need to like make it better, make it, incrementally more efficient. For that, subsidies and mandates basically say everybody decarbonize your energy grid right now, switch to zero carbon sources, cars have to be electric cars, blah, blah, blah. That will help private businesses scale up. So that's part of the Green New Deal I really like and will help technology.
And that part, because some of it, when I was reading some of your piece, a lot of it was include, well, here's carrots we could give. I also want, when we come back from this very quick break, that'll last about 15 seconds, want to ask about what sticks are worth putting in. We're talking to Noah Smith. We're talking about a Green New Deal. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We're going to be right back. Thanks for being with us. We're back with the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith here with Noah Smith. We're talking about the Green New Deal, the stuff he hates, the stuff he likes, and his own ideas. Stuff he hates, well, it seems pretty expensive and it doesn't address enough globally. Stuff he likes includes the smart grid and infrastructure, includes focusing on technology, increasing the budget of the green technology apparatus in the federal government, ARPA from $300 million to $30 billion with a B in the latter number. More like the National Institute of Health. What's other stuff that you think that you either like or you think needs to get into the discussion, Noah?
I like the mandates for renewable electricity, for basically getting all our power from non-carbon producing sources. I like that, although I think we need to include nuclear in that and not decommission nuclear plants because that would just hamper us. Nobody likes nuclear waste, but let's keep the nuclear around until we can cheaply replace it. And so I like that, and I like the idea of basically mandating electric cars, saying internal combustion engine, you had your day, goodbye. Now it's time for everybody to have electric cars. I like both of those things.
What about a big carbon tax?
Love it, love it. It's not in the Green New Deal at all, but I love it.
And why do you think it isn't in the Green New Deal? You think it's because of the concern that it would most impact the people with the least?
That's part of it, and the way you get rid of that is just by rebating it to poor people. So you tax carbon and you get just mail checks to poor people, and that completely takes away the impact on the poor people, and it makes it actually a redistributive policy instead of this falling hard on the poor. And I think ultimately the reason they don't like a carbon tax is because it seems wonky, it seems neoliberal and technocratic, and it seems like it's a hallmark of the guys that the people writing this deal don't like, and that's a mistake because it's actually a pretty good policy.
Yeah, in fact, if all that happened was a big carbon tax with everybody getting a check, and that's the only thing that happened, I think that it would do not only a bunch for wealth inequality, it would even be a baby step or if not a baby step, at least a nod in the direction of a UBI, of universal basic income, but would also start putting incentives for everybody to use less than they need in terms of carbon. What are other elements you hope get into the discussion of a Green New Deal?
So other things that we need in the discussion of the Green New Deal are, number one, taxes, how to pay for it.
Yeah.
A bunch of international stuff. So there's a lot of internationally focused things we could do. So we could give, complete free trade to any country that makes a big effort to decarbonize its economy, and we could put up trade barriers to countries that basically have very carbon-intensive economies that burn tons and tons of carbon.
And this is how you want to. This is the lever you want to use, or one of the levers you want to use to impact global. Recognize if we don't do it only in the United States, it ain't enough. We need to get other people doing it also.
Exactly.
How else do we leverage? If we do leadership, so we do our own stuff, so we actually demonstrate some virtue, and we use environmental standards, carbon standards on trade policy. Any other levers we can use to galvanize the world to work on this?
Oh yeah, a lot. So we can ban fossil fuel exports. We can say our coal, our oil are staying in the ground forever. They will never be burned. You will not have them, and that'll raise the scarcity of fossil fuels in the world and raise the price of coal and oil on global markets. We can also subsidize exports of green technology. So suppose that like Tesla is going to sell some batteries to other countries, we can actually pay them to do that, which helps them scale up and also helps other countries switch away from fossil fuels to subsidize those things. Finally, we can what was I talking about?
Everyone gets a pony,
yeah.
Noah. I want everybody to get a pony instead of a car.
Everyone gets a pony unless it's a carbon-burning pony, in which case we hit you on the head with a bat, and that's basically what we have to do.
Yeah. Well, let's have that be the last word, Noah. Noah Smith, where can people find out more about your stuff?
People can read my stuff at Bloomberg.
Thanks,
Bloomberg
man.
Opinion.
I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
You are listening to Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jeff. I want to get to your calls. What I found interesting was that some of this debate was set up oppositionally, and whereas I think some of this can be both and. And what I like is if we start framing the debate about what the heck we're going to do about this, then maybe we'll actually do something about it. And people will fall over themselves, will compete to do something rather than do nothing. We won't have an argument about is climate change real as much as we'll have what the heck are we going to do about it. We won't have a debate just about should we do something about it. We'll start at the assumption yes, and then let's have an argument about what the best ways to do something about it are, or what the best some things are. I want to get to your calls. Do we have time for calls? We got 1 minute. Who's going to be the quickest? Jason, WCPT ain't afraid of me. You got 30 seconds. You've been waiting very patiently, my friend.
Hello?
Jason, go ahead. You want to plug healthcare? Oh, Jason. We'll have to try again. Your phone isn't working very well. The Jeff on 910 Radio in San Francisco. You got like 20 seconds.
I just want to push for public banking. There's a big push in San Francisco for a public bank.
Hell yeah.
And I think that's the big thing. And in fact, AOC was down in L.A. helping them with Trinity Tran, and they were pushing for an L.A. public bank.
Did you call yesterday on this topic also and not get through?
Yeah, I didn't get through.
Thank you for calling again.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate your work, but I think it's huge, and we can do so much there. And the power's in our hands. If people would get active,
it's huge.
Read Ellen Brown's books and
plug the book again. Plug your favorite book on the topic.
Any Ellen Brown book, Web of Debt, or she has one on public banking.
Ellen Brown on public banking. I appreciate it. No, because it's not taxing people. It's a way to harvest resources that doesn't tax people. And it's also something that can be done at the local level. Mitch McConnell can't block it, right? I mean, they might try to pass some legislation to sweep it away, but as long as there are some allies that can keep that from happening in Congress, which is it's easier to stop something in Congress than it is to make something happen in Congress. It's something that can happen in San Francisco, can happen in Duluth, can happen in Portland, can happen in Minneapolis.
In North Dakota.
There you go.
You know.
Jeff, thank you so much for calling, and thank you for calling again from San Francisco, plugging public banking. This is something that Thom Hartmann listeners can do in their hometowns. That can push on city councils. There's a lot to figure out. Read Ellen Brown's book. Thanks for listening to us. We're going to be back right after this. Support all the people that support the Thom Hartmann Show.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show, and that number is 202-808-9925. What have I been saying that's stupid? Feel free to tell me. I might take it hard, but I'll do my best.
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks to the people who've been engaging. The phone call number here. The phone call number? Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. 202-808-9925. That's the phone call number. The Twitter number, which is what I'm calling it, is either at Thom Hartmann or at Jefferson D. Smith. We appreciate you. People have been waiting very patiently, and I really appreciated when people are bringing up I think we'll all continue to appreciate people bring up the local efforts y'all are doing. Because I have this, I'm not calling it a hypothesis, I'm calling it a theory. What's the difference? Theory is a hypothesis that has facts to bear it out. I have a theory that our best chance is modeling policy and making change in cities, sometimes in states, but particularly in cities. The highest leverage change that we can. That includes the public banking example. Doesn't raise taxes, does interfere with power. I don't mean to say therefore it's easy. It does interfere with power. Pitched it to the now mayor of my hometown when he was the then treasurer. He said, oh, well, the banks wouldn't really like it. That's what he said. I know the banks wouldn't really like it. But that's not, but if they get to decide, that's part of the problem. The answer to how we're going to get out of this mess has got to include not only local involvement in discussion, not only local involvement in new media channels, not only support for free speech TV, following Tom on YouTube, supporting your local radio station. Shout out to X-Ray FM in Portland. And all of the folks who've been calling in, from WCPT to the people listening on iHeartRadio to the people from all over the country, our friends in Madison, our friends in Minneapolis. But also public policy. Also public policy at the local level. Women's suffrage didn't happen because Congress decided it was going to happen first. Women's suffrage happened because it went state by state by state. Automatic voter registration hasn't happened in Congress. It did happen in Oregon. Shout out to the Bus Project. Shout out to the Alliance for Youth Action. If we are going to combine the ripples of hope, we've got to get some more ripples going. If you have an example that's happening in your town that you think and I'm telling you, that Thom Hartmann listenership could do this stuff. That Pat Robertson wasn't that politically influential in the 1970s. He became politically influential. He ran for president, and they didn't win that. They didn't even get very close. But they started winning school board races across the country because they realized that, a large but manageable group of people could win school board races across the country. The Thom Hartmann listenership could impact policy across the country, and not just by emailing your congressperson, not just by cheering real loud at an inspiring YouTube video, but actually by engaging with your city council, engaging with activist groups in your town and saying, hey, let's get a public bank. Hey, let's support a co-op network in our town. Let's do public financing for elections in our city. That's a big one. We could do that in cities across the country. And if you did it, all of a sudden, you start to subsidize underrepresented voices. It's a huge path for more communities of color to engage in the political process. If you do something like Seattle has done, or if you do something like Portland has done, if you do something like New York has done with a 6-to-1 match, New York City, that gives a chance for more voices. It also means that those campaigns will hire staff, and those staff won't just be the political consultants. I think if somebody in my town started out as a student activist and then started running campaigns, helped elect a senator in Oregon, and then tried to ran an unsuccessful campaign for mayor, and then needed a job, so took a job for Uber. And now he works for the Chamber of Commerce. Somebody who worked for me back in the Bus Project days, did that for a while, started out as a volunteer, then had a job, needed to do something that would actually, got married, needed to do something that would actually pay the bills. And so took a job for the Business Council. And now much of his time is spent arguing against teachers' unions. And I say this not to throw those dudes under the bus, But just to say, if people want to live lives within the political process, that we need routes that aren't just the Chamber of Commerce or the Business Council, that aren't just Uber. And publicly financed elections would be one way to have people that were picked, not only the people who were wanting to be part of the revolving door, but help empower the activist base, the purpose-driven base, the people that say, when we get together, it's not because we're just doing favor trading. It's not just because I'll buy your product if you invest in my stock, if you hire me for the next gig, if you'll help me get a no-bid contract and help my buddy get a tax break. But we come together not only as friends of mutual benefit, but as, was it Plato or Aristotle? I get them mixed up. Somebody else will call and say it was Socrates. I think it was Plato. Said not just as friends of pleasure or as friends of mutual benefit, but as friends of the good, who organize together around our highest and best purposes and build apparatus, build political, electoral, and even financial apparatus around our best values. Not only pretending to have values or defining our values by how we can get greatest economic advantage. And if we had publicly financed elections in 100 places, you'd start fostering all kinds of leaders who were used to a system of how to get elected, if not, how do I modulate my best ideas so that I can appeal to the largest checks, not the highest number of checks, but the largest checks. But they'd be starting to think, how can I generate ideas that will get the most support and that are the smartest, and we'll have a contest of ideas. And you'll have all sorts of leaders who've been elected in county commissions and city councils around the country who are then running for Congress. And it won't be AOC being the lone vote on something, which has happened and will happen again. But there'll be lots of those folks who are coming up through the system because we have fundamentally transformed the path to power. And that's something we can do, not just by wishing real hard, but by actually going out and brick by brick, not building a wall of exclusion, but building the apparatus for democracy, building the apparatus for inclusion, participation, and power wielded by the people. Because if everybody had a little voucher, that's the thing they're doing in Seattle, doubled the number of people donating to political campaigns because someone can get 4 $25 vouchers they can give to the candidate of their choice. And all of a sudden, when somebody's looking for power, they'll go to the people because that's where the power will be. We could do that. What's other stuff we can do? What's stuff that you're doing? What's stuff that's happening around the country that you think is awesome, that you think other people should copy? Or at least get thanked for? Because we appreciate you. This doesn't have, we don't have to do this show just as the complaint hour. Donald Trump's dumb. Episode 9. Donald Trump did a dumb thing. Episode 427. Republicans are bad. Episode 1722. What's good stuff that's happening? What's good stuff you're doing? What's the stuff we should express gratitude? By the way, gratitude helps. It doesn't help the recipient. It helps the recipient, but it doesn't merely help the recipient. People studying at Berkeley and I think at UC Davis in the positive psychology department, I know that sounds crunchy, but a lot of the best people are crunchy. That might be why they're crunchy and why they're the best people. When they did the research, they recognized that if you will express gratitude, let's compare it to the lottery. If you win the lottery, you'll get like 5% happier, at least for a little while, until you forget and you're not happy anymore. You get back to your regular happiness set point. But if you'll express gratitude, like write 5 thank you notes on a regular basis, keep doing it, you'll get also about 5% happier and you will stay that way. Gratitude can help you sleep better. It can help you live longer. It can help your heart rate. It can help you do better at your job. It's just good. So what is the public gratitude you want to express? What's something cool happening that someone else can steal or somebody else can just say thank you? Call 202-808-9925. How many minutes do I have, Sean? Well, this is time at least for Johnny. Oh, where'd he go? Somebody wanted to call, somebody was calling in saying the wealth tax is not necessary. I really wanted to hear your argument. 202-808-9925. Lost your call. 202-808-9925. And also call that number if you've got some gratitude to share, because we appreciate you. I got a tweet in. They used a word that I can't use on the radio, but it was the F word. about nuclear energy. We're not doing include nuclear energy in the Green New Deal. Be interested in your opinions on that. My response that I offered during the break was, yeah, hate nuclear waste, also hate burning up all the carbon. Cory Booker came out saying, yeah, we should do nuclear. If we're really going to do this at scale, the way to do it at scale is to do nuclear power. I think it's a really important and interesting debate. I have a lot of skepticism about the use of nuclear power. I'd be interested in your views. And we, of course, will continue to welcome our concerns, because demonstrating concerns should not be insulted. It is hugely important. It is our right and duty. And also want to highlight the cool stuff that y'all are doing. Johnny from Free Speech TV, Lamarck, Texas. You want to make a quick case? We got like 20 seconds.
Yeah, first need your email. I need to email you how I arrived at my tax scale. What's your email?
JeffersonSmith@gmail.com.
At Gmail.
Yeah, if I say it a lot of times, it might be a really bad idea. I would just say to the bots out there, don't use it. No bots, please. And no spam. I don't want any spam. I don't want any hate mail. I just want constructive, well-thought comments. As long as that's the rule that I'm sure will be abided by, you can have my email address. Stay with us, Johnny. We'll get to you. We'll also come right back. You're listening to The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. It's Thursday. It's Valentine's Day. It's Oregon's birthday. We love you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for listening. 202-808-9925. And we're going to have Bob Ney Talk Media News coming up pretty soon. Johnny, back to you in Lamarck, Texas. You want to talk about commercial media? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, in answer to your earlier question, when you asked why or how is it that a significant majority of Americans apparently take democracy for granted?
Yeah.
Well, when you think about the bottom 60% of Americans who have to work a 9 to 5, as you know, they've got other things on their mind, and the last priority they have, unfortunately, for the rest of us is they don't follow the news too well, and the ones who do, unfortunately, they consume CNN and Fox, which comes along with commercial TV, which beats them over the head with advertising for pickup trucks, beer, airline travel, perfume, the latest clothes, restaurant deals. So when they get immersed in that day after day, that affects their reality. They don't, when they think about that, and then they might hear someone like me trying to compete with Survivor or The Voice or TMZ, my fact-based arguments about what's happening sounds kind of boring, if not scary, and too intellectual. So what's the alternative? The default is you stick your head in the sand and say, I'm in a state of denial because that's easier and less costly for me.
Yep. Michael, you're on from Denver, Colorado. Go ahead.
Hello, Jeff. Every time I hear your name, I think about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Sure enough, so does my dad. Although he did, by the way, he didn't even know. Like, I didn't even make that connection, and nor did my family until I was in law school. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, Jeff, just briefly here, you had someone call about public banking. While I was trying to get through to you, I called up Ocasio-Cortez's office to remind her she's doing a great thing, and we definitely need that. It's not just a great idea, it's a necessary idea. But the other thing is, and Tom's mentioned it quite a few number of times, that the United States Post Office used to do banking. When I was a kid, and I'm 70 years old, I remember going to the big main terminal in Manhattan in New York City, where I'm from, and all that. And my grandfather, a union member, did all his banking there at the post office.
Yep.
And that is what we need. That's, getting the government to do the right thing for us that we know is the right thing. And I'll say here, lastly, positive thing, we have a Denver teacher strike here. I'm doing everything that I can to support the teachers, including giving them rides down to the schools so that they don't have to use their cars and everything, and I'll continue to do that until the strike is resolved.
Michael, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it. And yeah, love the public banking. And if school-based health centers, post office-based banking, there's public infrastructure right now that could be used to even better purpose. Joe from Cupertino, it's not all about complaining. Go ahead.
That's right. It is wonderful speaking with you, Jefferson. I appreciate that you fill in for Tom and give him a break. I wanted to just briefly comment about what you were saying about, being negative all the time. And a caller called into Tom the other day, and I wrote it down. He says, may you receive in abundance what you wish for others. And I've been thinking about that, and I just got to, go from there, because as I tweet or as I write on the internet there, I oftentimes forget that, I reflect that. I also wanted to just say I'm really sad that we're losing a friend of mine. He's a radio host. I guess he's going out of business. And Norman Goldman is a great radio host. I think that as a lawyer, we're missing out with people like you to keep the public informed.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate the shouts out. We're going to be right back. This is Tom's show. I'm sitting in. You can get the Thom Hartmann soundtrack. Actually, I don't know if you can. I just like the idea of the Thom Hartmann soundtrack because I like the songs and I want to know if I can get the full versions because I just start to dance and then it's time to talk on the show. I never really get a good groove going. But if you download the CD, if you get the vinyl, if you get the 8-track, you can keep the dancing going. And you could even play it as a bed under our Democracy Talk and really get your groove on. We are right now getting our groove on. What am I doing? Talking to Bob Ney, Talk Mini News, TalkMiniNews.com. Bob, what's your favorite song?
Let's see, maybe Highway to Hell.
Speaking of which, what's happening in Washington, D.C.?
Why not,
What's happening in the country you want to talk about?
Well, speaking of that topic, let's go over to Warsaw, Poland, because there was a supposed conference which started out by us. It was a conference on Iran, and then it turned into a conference on the Middle East peace, security, economic development. And that was because a lot of our allies said we're not going to attend that conference, or people sent lower-level individuals to that conference, Jefferson, because they realized it was nothing but sort of a drumbeat by the Trump administration for a pre-war cursor to Iran. Now, the reason I say that, let me give the quote here, and I don't want to mess it up, but when Prime Minister Netanyahu arrived, he said that on his Twitter account that an open meeting with representatives of leading Arab countries that are sitting down together with Israel in order to advance the common interests of war with Iran. Then he changed an hour later the Twitter account to say, advance the common interests of combating Iran. But he at first put war with Iran. And then after that, of course, Rudy Giuliani, not on behalf of the Trump administration, but obviously he is part of the Trump administration, and one of their lawyers, as we know, he gave a speech, and he had the picture of Maryam Rajavi, who is married to Masoud Rajavi, and they are head of the Mujahideen cult known as MEK. And that group were certified terrorists. They had originally taken our hostages from the embassy that we had in Iran at the time in 1979 after the revolution. And they were a designated terrorist group until they were decertified a few years ago. And he spoke on their behalf. Now, he actually was paid by them around $150,000 at the time they were still a designated terrorist group, and he got away with that. So he's been on their payroll for quite a period of time. And there were a few hundred is all there were at that protest. Now, the reason I bring them up is because, we relied on Ahmed Chalabi and others for fake, false information and lies, which led us into a war with Iraq. And now we're relying on the Mujahideen cult for the same types of information, which this administration, courtesy of John Bolton, National Security Agency, is absolutely, I believe, categorically, as many others do that analyze this in D.C., headed towards a potential war with Iran. So, this was not a summit about Mideast and a peace or economic prosperity. It was a summit that now the Trump administration, Jefferson, had to backtrack on because even our allies over there said, wait a minute, you're going too far with this. It's all an attempt to get Europe out of the Iran nuclear deal. And if Europe gets out of the Iran nuclear deal, then, quote, there is nothing to stop Iran except military action. So I'm just warning as a precursor and analyzing this entire situation for a multitude of years. This administration is bound somehow to want to have some type of conflict, which might be kind of convenient in 2020, if you follow my drift.
Yeah. And let me ask you, the word that was edited, do you think that was a teleprompter written word gaffe, the way that I think back to the Donald Trump line recently saying that the greatest accomplishment was the abolition of civil rights. And they say, oh, no, we didn't mean abolition of civil rights. We meant abolition, civil rights. And some say, well, that was a Freudian slip. And others say, no, it was just a slip. Do you take that as just a slip, or do you think it belied something? It demonstrated a plan for war?
Oh, I think it's a slip on purpose. It's aimed. You know how things are, quote, leaked, and then the White House says, oh, we don't know who did that when they themselves leaked it.
Yeah.
I think it was thrown out there to give that warning to Iran that they're willing to go to war. And it was 1 hour later that it was changed. Look, every prime minister, every president, every major leader, they have staff people that watch for these types of mistakes. That was a mistake that was allowed to sit for 1 hour. And that's not just a mistake. It's saying we want to gather people up to have a war. And so I think it was done intentionally to send the bone-chilling message out there that that's what, a couple of people are headed to. And the main entity behind this is Mohammed bin Salman, the king of Saudi Arabia, acting king at least. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is all behind this conference. Jared Kushner's there, who's close to Mohammed bin Salman. So you can start to put the dots together. Kushner's currying favor with Saudi Arabia because they're all basically over there saying, hey, we want to beat that drum, and that drum leads to war with Iran. And trying to talk Europe out of the nuclear deal. And if they did get out of it, again, what's left to stop Iran? And then the argument would be, well, we have to stop it by war.
All right. You want to keep talking on this, or you got another topic?
No, I've got another topic.
Go ahead.
Of course, the shutdown. And the Senate will act on the shutdown because some of the senators are headed over to this conference, and, the jets will be fired up. The president won't stop the jets this time. So, as you know, the Jefferson, they'll be headed over to that conference. And, again, the president is going to say that part of the $375 million will be used to build the wall. Senator Schumer made it clear today that's really not wall money. But, there's obviously, too, some concessions. The Democratic side won out very big with the Violence Against Women's Act because the Republicans, through Mitch McConnell, wanted to obviously keep that redone until September, which would not allow any major changes to be done to that measure.
Bob Ney, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. And that was one other thing in our closing seconds. Anything else we should be paying attention to on the shutdown? Where should we find out more? Talk Media News?
Talk Media News. You can tune into it.
Thank you so much for calling us.
Thank you.
Be well. We'll be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Third hour coming up soon.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school boards, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
One of the really great ways that you can support our program, specifically just the Thom Hartmann program here, and all the work that we're doing, is by going to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, all run together, and signing up. Become a supporter of our program. And we have special content that's only available to our Patreon supporters, including a rant that we just put up about this amazing thing that I just learned. I learned this from Professor Barack Orbach of the University of Arizona Medical School, or Law School, that Robert Bork's bizarre idea that it doesn't matter how big companies get, it doesn't matter how destructive they are of competition, it doesn't matter how they wipe out local communities, all that matters is that consumers have low prices, led to directly the Walmartization of America. It was adopted by the Supreme Court in '77, by Reagan in '82, and it's still the law. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, everybody. Lovers of peace and freedom. Friends of the show. Denizens of places that listen to the radio, watch YouTube, watch Free Speech TV. Pay attention. We appreciate you. 1 year ago, Parkland shooting. A group of students in the aftermath seized the attention of the nation, saying never again. Well, there has been again. Joining us now, friend of the show, Igor Volsky, to talk about what we've learned in that year and what we might have to look ahead. Igor, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. What have we learned this past year?
Well, we learned that when people organize and when people push and demand for change, they can have a big, big difference. I'm not just talking about the results of the midterm elections that pushed dozens of NRA-backed lawmakers out of office, but we're also in a place where at least 40 companies have broken ties with the NRA over this past year. We're also in a place where you have young people for the first time saying that gun safety is the number one issue they're going to vote for and they're going to vote on. It's the top concern for them.
Yeah, pause there for a second, Igor. Is there, I mean, for a long time, the political dynamic, setting aside money for a minute, but the political dynamic was a majority of the people would be in favor of, say, universal background checks, but they did not value that more highly than they valued other political issues. Whereas the NRA voter, there were lots of bullet voters, and pun intended, one-issue voters. How, in terms of the people who say this is my top issue, have you looked comparatively about where that, who has more, or relatively speaking, if it's still that many more pro-gun, single-issue voters, by what ratio that they are in the majority, or they outnumber single-issue gun safety voters?
Well, I haven't seen new polling on the single-issue question, but you're absolutely right that historically speaking, right, you had gun owners who had an entire identity around what it meant to be a gun owner, that they were far more passionate about the issue, both in the voting booth, but also in the way they gave money to organizations they supported. That is certainly changing. I mean, I don't have a number for you, but I think it's certainly changing because when you look at what young people care about, when you look at the general population, support is up, not just for background checks, as you mentioned, but also for bolder reforms, things like gun licensing, which is very popular with young people, things like gun buybacks, the general idea that we need to build a future with fewer guns, that we have too many guns, right? That being as the kind of the top goal of everything we're doing and the long-term goal that we're building towards. All of that is significantly increasing, and at the same time, you have the NRA, A, losing revenue, B, spending less in political elections than they had in the past, and D, facing trend lines that are really, really dangerous for them, at least, right? Because we have fewer and fewer people owning guns. They just own more guns. That's a problem in and of itself. But also, you certainly look at younger generations, and hunting is really no longer a recreational sport. Young people and others really have little interest in guns. So all of this says that on this issue, we're moving in the right direction. The question is, how quickly can we get there towards a world with fewer guns, and how many lives can we save in the process?
What policy accomplishments have happened? Do you have a quick litany of things that have happened at this, let's say maybe the state level, or heck, at the federal level since Parkland in the past year? And I know the list is not as long as you'd like it to be, but what are some things that have happened?
Well, significantly on the federal level, you saw just yesterday the House Judiciary Committee pass a universal background check bill out of committee. It's going to move to the House floor. That's significant, and that's a good first step towards building a future with fewer guns.
Would that get a hearing? Will that get a hearing in the Senate? Will that get a floor vote in the Senate?
It's going to be up to Mitch McConnell.
That's why I asked my question.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
I think that given the fact that he's up for re-election, I think it complicates things.
Yeah.
So that's on the federal level. On the state level, we've seen tremendous progress. 67 bills have become law since Parkland in this past year. Most of them deal with what's called an emergency risk protection order, which allows an individual to petition a judge to take guns away from a person in crisis for a temporary period of time. Those laws have already saved lives, and it's great to see them kind of expanding around the country.
Where are we falling short?
Well, we're falling short by not taking the same kind of bold approach on guns as we do on other issues. So, you know, progressives are now talking about a Green New Deal. They're talking about single-payer health care. They're talking about closing and shrinking the income inequality gap through taxes on millionaires and multimillionaires. But when it comes to guns, we still don't have that kind of big, bold goal.
That's a great point.
Yeah, we talk about incremental steps, right? Background checks and assault weapons. All of these things are important tools, but what's the organizing principle? And so a lot of what I do is define that organizing big, bold principle as fewer guns. And the reason for that is because you look at all the research domestically, internationally, it all shows without a doubt where there are more guns, there are more gun deaths. And to really deal with that problem, we have to be upfront with what we want. We want a future with fewer guns and where guns are harder to get. And I think all of our lawmakers and all of our politicians who are aspiring for higher office can really, you know, I encourage them to adopt that kind of approach. Because, hey, you know, this is a time when folks are talking about big, bold solutions. They need to apply the same kind of logic to guns as well.
If we thought about our choice of big picture policy slogans on three vectors, maybe I'm missing some, but on three vectors. One, that it would really make an impact, that would be effective. Two, that it's doable, that we'd actually have a chance to do the thing that would make that impact. And three, that it's inspiring. Right, healthcare for everybody. It's like, oh, I'm one of everybody. I could get some healthcare. That's cool. And we know it would actually have impact on lots of people, then the question is how doable it is. At least it's 2 out of the 3, and then the argument becomes around that third thing. For your fewer guns, where do you think it scores on those 3, or which do you like? Which motivates it? Is it because you find it inspiring? Do you think it's the most doable, or you think it would have the biggest impact if it were done? You've been at least making the case around impact.
Well, yeah, I mean, the impact is huge, and we know this from experiences in the states that have tougher gun laws, certainly internationally. I think, look, in terms of slogan, is it inspiring? I think it is. Can people brainstorm other bold slogans around this? Sure. But I talk about it in terms of fewer guns mean safer communities, mean safer movie theaters, safer churches, safer schools. The list goes on. And ultimately, that's what we are all invested in building.
Yeah. And I think I hadn't thought enough about this. In fact, there's a really helpful insight that you offered, that identifying that bold line, that bold underlying principle that people can organize around, that's some work still doing. The thing I do like, speaking for myself, what I do like about it is that by process of elimination, I'm thinking it's the others, like gun safety or gun control, or each of those. Well, maybe all I have to do is turn my safety on and put my gun in a lockbox, and maybe that doesn't have anything to do with making sure my church or making sure that movie theater is safe. But Igor, where can people find out more?
GunsDownAmerica.org for more information. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We'll be back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls. We'll be talking about the Republican tax plan. We'll be talking about the Green New Deal. We'll be talking about peace and talking about you. Jesse, you're on the air in Free Speech TV. You are the runner-up in Most Patient Listener Award challenges from Fort Collins, Colorado.
Yeah, I know. I was on hold for like half an hour. But, there's one thing.
That's 28 minutes, man. That's nothing. There are people on hold. I know, Tom, I was once on hold for like 42 minutes. So sometimes I sit in this chair, I still on hold 42 minutes. But anyway, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Well, I'm going to hit on a couple of things, and I'm going to make it really fast. Okay, one, I don't know if anybody's seen AOC on Frontline. It was like a couple months ago, maybe like 3 or 4 months ago. But she got eaten up, and she really seemed really, really out of touch with foreign relations. Okay, and then another thing, like about this illegal immigration. My mom's worked at King Soopers for over 20 years, and the thing that fires her up the most is that these people will come in with crab legs, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, all that stuff, and then they bring out their EBT card. So that's another thing, like people don't realize how much people are really taking advantage. But, I don't know.
So they should only have bad-tasting ice cream and food that's not as good if they have an EBT card? If you have an EBT card, buy what you want. I don't know. Am I being too much of a dum-dum? Or do you think by having that in line, it makes people... Say again?
Taxpayer money?
I mean, wherever I get, so it just does not.
Crab legs on taxpayer money on on hardworking American citizens.
Yeah. What would you do instead?
When I can't even afford to eat crab legs, and I work 40 hours a week.
What would you do instead?
Well, what I would do instead is I would let the people that are here, I'd let them stay here. But I'm with Trump. I would definitely get some border security, because did you see what?
And by border security, you mean
Chapo Guzman on though? Did you see what they convicted Chapo Guzman on? How many people did he kill? How do we not?
Okay, Jesse, I'm going to take the bait. If Chapo Guzman, if there was success in appropriating $5.7 billion for a wall, First of all, that would not build the whole medieval wall. That you'd probably need $30 billion for that. And because before it was projected $25 billion, which is this top conversation is why he said Mexico was going to pay for it, and they're not going to. It was a lie from the beginning. But if we went further and actually looked at what it takes to build public works projects and realize that mega projects usually go 50% over budget and sometimes double over budget, so we're probably talking closer to $30 to $50 billion for this wall. Do you think the Chapo Guzman would be stopped by a medieval wall? Do you think it'd be stopped by a couple other additional border security agents? The cartels build tunnels that avoid border security agents, and they can get planes, they can get into airports that have nothing to do with the border.
But you know what? It's the same thing with any substance abuse. Anybody that's abusing a substance, the more you take away, the less problem they'll have.
But what I'm saying is, I'm saying you build.
Let it flow through. You know, of course there's going to be chaos. If you just let it flow through, But
your example was Chapo Guzman. What is the line border security doing about Chapo Guzman? What is that doing about limiting the control of drug cartels in Mexico and South America and Central America? What is that doing about them? They don't walk across. The people that, if you build a wall, the people that stops are people like on long hikes. Chapo Guzman does not need to go on a long hike. He has a fleet of airplanes.
So I know because I have cousins in Laredo, and what people don't realize is there's been 100,000 people killed.
Jesse, they're going to break. They're cutting us both off. We appreciate the call. We're back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Time is flying by. It's flying by. Y'all are pretty dope. We appreciate you. Somebody asked me about my North Bend story, and it's only really an interesting story if you're from Bend or North Bend. If enough people ask me, I will tell you the story, but you will probably be disappointed because it's really only interesting if you're from Bend or North Bend. But I've gotten up to a couple requests, so I need to at least say that. I will say my estate tax piece, if anybody asks, and I will say my World War II piece about why the death of World War II vets, I think, has something to do with the decline of support for, or rather, the increase of more people taking democracy for granted. But what I want to do is your show. I want to hear from you. There are lots of people who are waiting patiently. Let's pick the winner of the Most Patient Listener Award, Mark from San Francisco. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, Jefferson. I wanted to talk about the Democrats and what they need to do in this next election coming up, in the presidential election.
Yeah.
And that is to really focus on the Republicans' tax scam and how it hurt middle class and how the Republican Party has continued to take wealth from the middle class and poor and bring it to the top. I think this is a great opportunity for them to really plaster the Republican Party as the party of the rich, and they have been the really culprits of income inequality.
And people are going to be realizing more and more, there are a bunch of people, including a bunch of Trump voters, whose taxes have been raised, who are actually getting tax bills before they get refunds, or whose refunds are going down, who realized, oh, wait a minute. This meant that my taxes are increased so that we could lower the taxes at the high end. And it's only now dawning on some people that there's some people who are in on the joke, and there's some people upon whom the joke is on. And I appreciate the call. Any presidential candidate, any congressional candidate, anything even happening at the local level that you're tracking that you hope informs the debate more? Any ways to approach, to discuss what you have called the Republican tax scam that you think is most edifying or useful?
I think that the fact that the middle class has lost their deductions, the home deduction interest rate, even working Americans are losing, their ability to write off some of the taxes that are accumulated with working. They're working, their uniforms, their travel, all those things that really are the middle class deductions have been taken away.
Yep. And a lot of people don't realize how many people got a tax increase so that we could get a higher deficit and so that could fund tax cuts at the high end. But Mark, thank you so much. We've got David watching on YouTube, wants to talk about the Green New Deal from Naugatuck, Connecticut.
Hi, I just wanted to point out, the economist didn't point out one crucial fact.
Please.
Which is a cognitive dissonance on the carbon people's side, the executives. If we had a Green New Deal, every environmentalist, Bill Kibben, Naomi Klein, admits that we'd have to burn a lot of dirty fuel to make the conversion.
Sure.
Sort of like if, the expenditures we'd have to make to go to Medicare for all. The question is, in a capitalist system, 10 years is an eternity. The question I have is, why isn't big oil or the carbon executives behind a Green New Deal? As far as these should be concerned, they would make a windfall over their careers, and who cares about 15 years in the future?
It's a good question. I want to dwell on it for a moment. The first is, I'm not an oil executive, so I'm not sure.
But I would have to guess true believerism.
Yeah, if I were going to guess, I would think at least two things. One is that almost any Green New Deal would include carbon taxes. Almost any Green New Deal would include or some degree of regulation, increasing or decrease, basically stuff that would decrease profit margins for fossil fuel companies. So they would see a bottom line impact. Second,
there is no carbon tax at the moment.
No, I get that.
And you're saying it's too late for one.
I get that. But at least you'd have regulatory structures or caps on fossil fuels. My impression, David, is that if we don't do something that limits the use of carbon, it's not very much new, it's not very much green, and it's not a very good deal.
We would need a lot of carbon to make the wind turbines and do the.
Yeah, but you don't need as much. But you don't need as much. You don't need as much carbon to spin a turbine as you need to operate an automobile. Anyway, my hypothesis, and again, I'm not in the boardroom, but my hypothesis is they would anticipate and at least fear some decline. But I also think there's something to your other point, which is that ideology might be impacting some of this, right? Saying, we don't want to do that fluffy-hearted stuff, combined with hassle, combined with, and then another, if they're not being just ideological, or would call true believerism, there is another risk that it would open up competition. That for the new technology, Exxon wouldn't yet be way far ahead from somebody else, right? I mean, even somebody like Tesla might be able to compete in a major new smart grid effort on a lot of replacement efforts.
Environmentalist says that we would have to burn more carbon to do the transition.
So you think that fossil fuel companies would actually make more money, that would actually be selling more carbon in the context of a Green New Deal in the run-up during that decade?
Yes.
All right, well, that's a factual question. Intelligent people don't argue about questions of fact, they check them out. I'll need to check that out.
All right, thanks.
Appreciate it, Dave. Maine, WCPT, ain't afraid of me. Go ahead.
Yeah, how you doing?
Well.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak that gentleman that you had on about, he was talking about seeing our democracy. What I wanted to say is they want to see the Republicans and the oligarchs and all that want to see our democracy in a country. They don't want to see a democracy.
Yeah, they fear democracy, right? That's been the point that's been made. Go ahead.
They're supposed to be democratized. We're supposed to have ensured our democracy to involve everyone and not just a few. But we have allowed capitalism to arrest our democracy, through privatization and
that's the Nancy McLean argument. That was the argument of the guest we had today. That's the thing and we can think about this as a new thing, or we can think about this as the same argument that was being had at the time that Magna Carta was written about what's going to be in charge, human peoples or property. Who gets to decide? I hope that you get to decide. And Maine, thank you for deciding to call us. Number 202-808-9925. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We got a little bit left, including some good stuff. Please call.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way. And this is from the introduction. I've borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history. Tolstoy wrote, "I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back." Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later, the question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. It focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical, long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political or economic crisis? Garo Parvitz, what then must we do?
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We appreciate you being with us. Winner of Most Patient Listener Award, Merlin.
Hey,
Santa Cruz, California. How you doing?
All right, man. I wanted to let people know that aren't aware that pirate radio in America exists. I'm a DJ on 101.3.
And you have an amazing voice, and I want to listen to you for a long time.
What's that?
Yeah, and you have an amazing voice.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that my whole life.
I know.
But we do exist, you know, where the pirate radio stations may be hurting right now, but we do exist, and we have no sponsors. We only get, you know, income from people that want to donate, and, you know, we've been around for like 23 years. As far as I know, we're one of the longest pirate radio stations in history. And we, you know, last month or the month before that, we got a letter from the FCC saying don't broadcast, so we, you know, hid our transmitter away and obeyed them. But, you know, that's going to be temporary. We're going to get back up. We're not breaking state law. We're not breaking city laws. We're not breaking anything but the FCC's rules.
And what's the...
People know that freakradio.org does exist. You can look us up on Wikipedia. You can look it up on a website. I think it's... I can't remember. It slips my mind right now. But Wikipedia, it's Free Radio Santa Cruz.
Free Radio Santa Cruz.
The city of Santa Cruz. We stand up for people's civil rights. Anybody can be a DJ if they apply. We all vote on it. It doesn't matter how poor you are. A homeless person could be a DJ. And, you know, we're trying to do a good thing here. And I mean, people just think pirate radio like Bigfoot, unicorns, UFOs. They're, you know, we're like, we do exist.
Yeah.
I just want to let people know. My show's on every Tuesday night at 7 p.m.
Good plug.
On freakradio.org.
My home station, X-Ray FM, shout out to the family. Our original studio, and in fact, some of our still DJs started out of a pirate radio outfit in Portland that did get shut down. But that was our original studio was from that pirate radio studio that we were friends of ours.
It's a great service to the community. I don't think many people realize that. Not to mention people that engage in this.
Yeah.
Might have like sordid pasts or whatever, and it really helps a person to get online and be responsible, you know, because you're a voice in the community and you can help other people out. You know, I tell people that are picketing, hey, you're picketing one day with a sign in your hand, one day, and you're saying something, but, you know, if you're on the radio, you can be on the radio once a week if you want to be a DJ.
Yeah, and some more people will hear you. We appreciate it. Also want to shout out to the LPFMs, low-power FM radio stations that have popped up around the country. Some of whom have picked up this show, and people who are finding ways that aren't just filtered by, you know, Silicon Valley to communicate to people and participate in democracy. We appreciate it. Let's get to Paul from WCPT. Ain't Afraid of Me, Woodinville, Washington.
Yeah, I want to talk about the tax scam. 3 things I want to let people know about.
Yeah.
Okay, so. Obviously, in the news, we're hearing that people are upset that their tax returns are not as large as they had been in previous years.
Yep.
And the reason is, I mean, I said this a year ago. People, as you remember, about a year ago now, we're talking about how, especially Trump supporters, I'm already seeing more money in my paycheck. And I always thought, even then, how could you know? And this was designed to make you think you're getting a tax cut. What was done was they adjusted the withholding tables.
Right.
Withhold less from your paycheck, so you're getting more money in your paycheck. That has nothing to do with how much you owe in your taxes.
Right, and everything now that people are finding out happened after the election.
Yeah,
Right, but when you got so what you pointed out, I'm just amplifying what you're saying. When you'd get your paycheck, and there'd be a few more bucks in it. You say, "Hey, look, tax cut," and then later you realize, "Oh, it's because now I'm not going to get as big a refund. I didn't get a tax cut. I might even get a tax increase. But by the time some people are figuring that out, the election's already happened. Fortunately, it did not decide the election."
That's correct. But what happened here is not only did they take less out of your paycheck. By the way, I wanted to point out, this was done in 1992 by George H.W. Bush. Remember his Read My Lips, No New Taxes?
Yep.
Well, in 1992, which was an election year, they did the same thing. They adjusted the withholding table so that you would have more in your paycheck and make him look better, but that didn't work for him. But what they've done with the withholding tables, they withheld so little that in some cases not enough was withheld. So the law says, I just went to a tax law seminar a couple of weeks ago, and the law says that you have to have pay at least 90% of your 2018 tax bill by the end of the year, or 100% of your 2017 tax bill by the end of 2018. If you don't pay 90%, you're subject to a penalty. Now get this. So in other words, if only 85% of what you owe is withheld, you're subject to penalty. Well, it wasn't everybody. It wasn't your fault. It was the slapped-together tax bill that the Republicans put together for Trump. But what happened was Trump ordered the IRS to say, well, this is unfortunate. So people if you pay your taxes in full by January 15th, this is what he ordered the IRS to announce, then you won't have to pay the penalty. Except, does everybody remember that the IRS was closed during January because why? Of a government shutdown. So the announcement never got out there. So people who had too little withheld from their paychecks will be subject to the penalty, even though it wasn't their fault. Second thing, second thing is, as Mark in San Francisco pointed out, not only are many deductions wiped out, which means you may end up paying more in taxes, exemptions, which is a slightly different thing. For instance, people remember on Form 1040, the second page, begin the second page, there was
almost everybody will remember Form 1040, the second page. Yeah, go ahead.
Blind or over 62, check this box, check that box, you get an extra. That's gone. And the third thing is, this lawyer pointed out to us, is that the sections of the tax code don't match up. Like when it says C Schedule XYZ, doesn't match up with Section ABC of the schedule book. It's kind of like
was that just haste? Was that just bad drafting?
Oh, haste. Yeah, it's kind of like if you look at a crossword puzzle and one down says C1 across, and then you go to one across, it says C1 down.
Yeah.
It's that kind of loop. And she said this thing was slapped together so fast to give Trump, so that Trump could sign this thing, remember, before it turned 2018, because if he signed it in 2018, it wouldn't apply till this year.
Yep.
They slapped it together so fast that all of these things are way off, so the preparers don't know what to do with it. They're having to call the IRS, and the IRS doesn't know what to tell them. So in some cases, you just say, well, they'll have to do it a simpler way, and you don't get to write certain things off. And Stephen Moore says that he knows nothing about this. All he knows is, this is what he said yesterday on a different conservative. He said all he knows is the only people that are paying more in taxes this year are the wealthy. Go ahead and fall on the ground laughing about that.
Appreciate it, Paul. Let's go to Patrick from Los Angeles, California. Patrick, go ahead.
Jeff, hey, buddy. Yeah, thanks for the line here. A couple days ago when Trump was in El Paso and the cameraman got attacked, the comment that he was making right at that very moment was, Mexicans and Asians are at their lowest point in the history of this country. And the crowd is applauding. You can hear it in the background as the camera's moving around, getting jostled by this knuckle dragger that was attacking that guy. I haven't heard anybody even comment on that.
I hadn't even heard that, and I'm embarrassed that I hadn't. I'm embarrassed that I missed it.
Oh, take a look at it. That's
tweet, send it to us. You can tweet at Thom Hartmann. You can tweet at me, Jefferson D. Smith. I would appreciate. I'd like to look at it.
Right on. There was that guy a couple minutes ago that was calling about the illegal immigrants and or just people that are using their SNAP benefits.
Yeah.
SNAP or whatever it is.
They got ice cream and seafood, and they should only be able to eat bologna and I don't know, Frogurt.
Well, that's stuff that's been on Fox.
Yeah.
I guess they found one time some guy in Orange County was a surfer, and he was claiming that he was using his benefits for crab legs and whatever. So.
No, it's. I mean, yeah, we get that part, and the guy actually kind of snuck up on me. I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's really his case. He really thinks that we would have stopped El Chapo if we had a wall, because he would have said, oh, there's a wall. I guess I'm going to get out of the drug trade. I'm going to give up. We're going to shut down the cartel. We're no longer going to do this anymore because look, there is a wall. I can't take a plane anymore because we'd have to fly over the wall, and clearly that's not what is intended by the wall.
As if the drugs are not coming, across the border in trucks or on ships. They're coming on ships. More or less, they're coming on ships packed right in the middle of a gigantic container where dogs can't sniff.
Here's the thing. Have you ever seen? And I don't think you have because it did not do very well. It was a B movie. Let's call it a B+ movie. It had a A-. Michael Keaton was in it. Did you ever see the movie Speechless?
Back in the 80s.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
I recall it.
Okay, so do you remember? So he plays Michael Keaton, and who was it? Gina Davis? They played speechwriters. Okay, do you remember his? And I am shocked that this has not become part of the parlance. I'm shocked that people with large microphones have not been showing these clips. I got to find it. Do you remember what his number one policy proposal? Michael Keaton said this is the key to the election: is if you do this blank thing. Do you remember what it was?
I don't. It's been many moons.
It was the friendship fence. This is not a new idea. That Michael Keaton in the movie Speechless said we're going to build a friendship fence. It was a medieval wall by a different name. And for some reason, this hasn't been, recirculated. Probably because it only got 3 stars, didn't make a whole lot of money, and, it's not on Netflix. But appreciate you, Patrick. We'll be back.
Take care. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be back in just a moment. We appreciate you. We're on Free Speech TV. I'm Jeff. We're going to listen to Ken, Great Falls, Montana. Hope you're doing great.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, good. Thanks for taking my call. We need to drop the word socialism. Let the Republicans take it out behind the bar and beat the crap out of it. But with the Green New Deal, we need to go back to the 30s where it comes from and use the programs out of the 30s. One of the best ones I know is the REA, Rural Electrification Authority. We totally electrified the whole rural part of the country in 20 years. We could do an SEA, Solar Electrification Authority, do the exact same thing using co-ops. And people join them. And there's all these programs from the 30s we can bring back, and we talk about it in those terms. Let them have the word socialism. Get rid of it. Go back to our fathers.
Let's dwell on that for a moment. Let's dwell because I also struggle with this. Right? There is one school of thought that says, all right, that word has been defined. It was probably the most. Maybe I should get rid of the most popular political word in the first half of the 20th century, which is why it was able to be co-opted by people who really wanted either communist tyranny or fascist tyranny, and because it was co-opted in those ways, the word was no longer the most popular word. And I hear from smart people argue, okay, therefore a different word, and others who say, no, remind people what the word means so it's not so easily tarnished. Because even if you don't say socialist, well, then somebody else will say, your Green New Deal, that's socialist. And if socialist equals bad, then you have to tangle into that argument saying, no, it's not socialist or whatever. So it's sort of tricky. What word would you use instead, or what set of words do you like?
I would just use the words from the 30s, from FDR.
Yeah.
Use all of the terminology that they used, our fathers used. It was socialism. A word by any other name would smell as sweet. But let's not bother trying to fight that battle. Let's just do the programs and relate them all back to the 30s. Relate them all back to the great Democrats of the 30s.
Yeah, and I do think there is at least something there, is that if we focus on not the ism, whatever the ism is, but focus on the value that needs to be delivered to people's lives, focus on the problem, focus on the solution, focus on the benefit, and then let other people maybe define it. That is at least a critical part of the answer. But Ken, thanks so much for calling.
You betcha.
Anne from Longmont, what's the long and short?
Colorado. Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call, and I've really enjoyed the program this week.
Thanks.
I'm calling about a couple previous callers that about his rant about people buying crab legs and so forth on food stamps.
Shouldn't eat that ice cream.
I'm coming from the perspective of me and 4 of my neighbors actually having run the food pantry in our city neighborhood.
Yeah.
And the first thing I resent people throwing out that kind of propaganda because it's meant to stigmatize people on food stamps.
Yeah.
And if, let's say something like that did happen, there's a couple reasons for that. It could be they just got a job and it's a fleeting celebration because they have extra money that month because they're just using the balance on their EBT card. The other situation could be that they just got extra donations from their food pantry, so they have extra money on their card. And the last scenario is, which is what we did at my food pantry, is we got grants that provided cleaning supplies and toiletries, which are not covered on food stamps or EBT.
Yeah.
And then they have extra money.
Exactly. Or there was a special on ice cream and seafood is another possibility. They're going to break, but thank you, Ann. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're wrapping up to the big finish. I got another request. It's too much buildup for too small a thing. This is only really interesting if you're either from Bend or North Bend. I will tell the brief version of the story. My dad is a small plane pilot, was on the Pilots Association, and he was in Bend. And this story will only be interesting is if you're either from those places or if you will go to a map and map Bend, Oregon and North Bend, Oregon. My dad comes home, it was in a trip from Bend. He says, yeah, these guys in a private plane came and flew in, and they walk in with their golf bags and their fancy clothes, and they order a car. And they tell the car to drive them to North Bend. And aren't they dummies? Well, the reason that's funny is because you need to look at the map between Bend and North Bend. Bend is in Central Oregon. North Bend is on the coast. These things are 200 miles away from each other, right? If you get a car, you fly to Bend and drive to North Bend, you are essentially driving almost the width of the state of Oregon. And then I was in a meeting of some, kind of fancy people. And the guy said, oh, you're from Oregon? I said, yeah. He said, oh, I went to Oregon just the other day, flew in. We went to Bend. We got a car. It took us to take it to North Bend. Realized it's 3 hours away. Same darn people or 2 dumb private planes. That's a story. Really interesting for Bend and North Bend. Let's go to Chuck from Attleboro Falls, Massachusetts. Go ahead, Chuck.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well.
I was in a restaurant the other day. I heard these 2 Trump supporters talking about how Trump's going to sign this because it didn't matter that he gave him any money, because he confiscated $14 billion that they're going to use for the border wall, and all Trump supporters are afraid to give Trump a win. And then they said something that made me get up and confront them. They said that the reason that they don't want Trump to have a win is they hate him, and it's a mental illness. And I went over to him and I said, thank you for being honest, because Trump haters do have a mental illness. It is. It's running friggin' rampant. Mm-hmm. It's a mental illness, and they can't get over that he won. And these people they're so obvious and they're so desperate to make Trump not look good that they need Prozac. They need to be treated. They need to be put in straitjackets, and they need a mental institution. That's all I had to say.
So Chuck, your concern is that people who are opposed to the president are opposed to the president because they have a mental deficiency. I think he wanted to make that point and leave. This is the narrative. It is the narrative that if there is greater concern, because, there is greater opposition to this president than any modern president. And if you support that president, you got to be able to explain that somehow. And cognitive dissonance won't allow you to explain it because somehow the president is bad, or somehow because the president has been accused of what the president's been accused of, or because the president has jacked up the deficit to historic heights despite saying he'd do the opposite, or because he said he would build a wall and Mexico would pay for it and that was never going to happen, or because there is significant concern that the White House has been compromised, or because there has been more turnover in senior staff positions in this White House than any time in modern memory, or because we have the biggest wealth disparity between rich and poor since 100 years ago, or because we are already seeing climate fires and huge impacts of climate change. Meanwhile, there is denial that that is even real. That it couldn't be those reasons. It couldn't be because of genuine policy concerns, of genuine concerns for humanity, genuine concerns for equality or for the environment. It has to be something else. So what could it be? Well, I guess if you wanted to make sense of it, and if your purpose wasn't a better country, if your purpose wasn't solving problems, or at least if your purpose wasn't democracy, or if your purpose at least wasn't saving the environment, saving the middle class, and saving democracy, if your purpose was to be a troll, if your purpose was, if you organized a team, let's say hypothetically, you organized a team around owning the libs, then the way you would explain it, well, it's not because there's real problems. It's because of mental illness, because of craziness. I will offer an alternative viewpoint. My alternative viewpoint is there are real problems. There are real concerns. I think we don't need to fixate merely on this president. Where I will agree is I think we've got deeper problems in this president that begat this president. That he didn't start the fire, as Billy Joel sort of said. That if we think that the removal of Donald Trump from the White House will cure the climate, we have another think coming. If we think the removal of Donald Trump from the White House will restore economic equality, some measure of it, if we think it will eliminate racism in the country or even soften racism meaningfully in the country, if we think it will change the media apparatus that has gotten us to the point where we are, if we think it will even change the Supreme Court, we've got another thing coming. That's not to say that focusing on the presidency isn't important. It is to say that we've got to focus on stuff that's deeper and broader. And that's why I appreciate that call, even though what he said at the call screen he wanted to talk about was sort of the opposite of what he did talk about. He was kind of lying. I still appreciate the call. Not only as a window to what folks are up against, but to remind all of us, anybody who's pro-democracy, that we have to not fixate. We have to not fixate on a single figure. The fixation on Nixon meant that after Nixon was removed, everybody exhaled. Nixon is gone. The world is better. Think of what's happened in the country since then. In fact, if you're going to start a clock, on where wealth disparity started to get worse, that clock would start about the year I was born. That clock would start right about when Nixon was impeached. That clock would start after that. In fact, it would start with Reagan, who seemed like a breath of fresh air, even though he was more conservative than Nixon. If we're going to fight for democracy, it's not about beating a single person or electing a single person. If we're going to fight for democracy, it means fighting for the fundamental systems by which we govern ourselves and getting those equipped for this century, equipped for human beings, equipped for the problems that face us now. And that means we all got to do it. Thank you to all the callers who offered great ideas, the people working co-ops, people working on public financing, people working on public banks, people making our world a little bit better, brick by brick, step by step. Thank you so much.
For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Goodbye, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day. Happy birthday, Oregon.
From New York.